She humiliated me at a luxury gala, then dropped her glass when she learned I was her new boss. I didn't completely grasp my grandfather's meaning when he said, "True success doesn't need a spotlight. It needs patience." That was until the night my sister's boss discovered my true identity and the room fell silent at a luxury gala, when I was referred to as a poor waitress. "Hi, I'm Victoria Hayes, and I used to let other people's perceptions of me shape my identity. A modest existence, an apron, a bakery from the outside. That was guaranteed by my sister Alexandra Reed. I was the less remarkable of her siblings, the one who could never quite live up to her idealized portrayal. Both my life and my achievements were shrouded in secrecy. Something changed, though, that night. My voice remained low. Retaliation was not my goal. I simply allowed reality to enter the room. Everything they thought they knew about me crumbled when that happened. This isn't simply a story about power, it's about a person who has been marginalized, disregarded, or ignored by their own family. If you can relate, then hang on. What happens when the woman they fired ends up owning the company they took pride in? It's a story about dignity. The aroma of cinnamon and survival wafted from the bakery where I was raised. The place was run by my mom. It was a small corner store in a working-class section of New Jersey, where everyone knew each other's kids and rent payments were sometimes delayed. Playgrounds and cartoons don't figure into my first recollections. They include things like getting up before the sun comes up to beat the first group of morning regulars, folding boxes of pink cake, and counting coins. I must admit, I wasn't particularly fond of it. Indeed, I gained more knowledge working behind the glass pastry counter than the majority of students do in school. A few things I picked up along the way: rhythm, perseverance, and making eye contact even when people avoided it. I was in charge of inventory by the time I was 16 years old. Between icing cupcakes, I read business books when I was 18 years old. After hours, I would use my mother's old laptop to study microloans and supply chain models in the back office, where I would get my real education. There was a lack of ambition when I was younger. We felt compelled to do it. We barely scraped by. The toil never ended, and my goals extended beyond mere subsistence. It needed to be scalable for me. However, the aroma of flour has long been one that Alexandra Reed despises. Only when the cameras were rolling did she put on her gloves to lend a hand in the kitchen. She found shame in our family's bustle, while I saw opportunity. As soon as she could, she slipped away to a world of sleek suits and rooftop brunches by enrolling in a prestigious business school. She did, in fact, climb quickly. Everyone loved hearing about Alexandra Reed, the daughter who made it, at dinner parties because she was so well-mannered and polished. On the other hand, I remained behind not due to a lack of ambition but rather because I was constructing something unique. I started my financial technology company, Alderon Capital, at the age of 25 with the goal of helping immigrants and small business owners, my mom included, get the loans they need. I shunned the traditional venture capitalists when seeking funding. I used a bootstrapping strategy, which involved reinvesting earnings and secretly forming partnerships with local groups and credit unions. Done in a low-key manner. Never obtrusive, it accomplished its purpose. We had gone national by the time I was 31, but I continued to assist on weekends at the bakery. Why? Because of the foundation, not the money. The experience brought me back to my true self. In Alexandra Reed's opinion, it was different. I was squandering potential in her eyes. On one occasion, she told me straight out, "You're brilliant, Ro, but you'll never be taken seriously if you keep smelling like buttercream and spreadsheets." I just grinned and made no response. She was unaware that a multi-million-dollar agreement had been signed by one of our most important licensing clients. Someone she did business with. Being underestimated made it easier. I was happy to watch Alexandra Reed play her game because it showed how people really were when they felt you were beneath them. Until she insisted on involving me, that is. Little did Alexandra Reed know, the side project I worked on had blossomed into a stealth empire. Alderon Capital was never mentioned in any of my social media posts. Instead of extravagant press releases and launch parties, there will be a steady stream of private contracts, licensing deals, scalable analytics, and revenue. It was easier for small businesses to get loans and run more efficiently with our software. Financial institutions and data firms saw us as crucial. My loved ones would always remember me as Victoria Hayes from the bakery. It used to annoy me, it was funny to me now. During a particular Sunday dinner, Alexandra Reed clinked her wine glass and inquired about the progress of my cupcake app with a sigh strong enough to cut granite. With that fake politeness that made it seem like she was offering support, she spoke it loudly enough for everyone at the table to hear. I informed her that everything was well. I omitted the fact that Harrington and Vale, her firm, had been utilizing our back-end analytics for almost 11 months from her disclosure. Under a white label agreement, my team had brought them on board. This was completely new to her. She said, "Don't get me wrong," while her smile fell short of her eyes. "Baking is a noble trade, and the tech stuff you do, it's cute, but it's not real scale, Ro. It's not leadership." If she knew I had voting shares that could veto her next campaign proposal, Would she still say that? I stared at her, trying to figure it out. For some reason, I had my doubts. Nonetheless, I made sure she had her time. It was more important to her than to me. Alexandra Reed's pride, you see, was like a delicately polished glass that was just a crack away from shattering. Moreover, her desperation was plain to see whenever she humiliated me in front of our parents. I was still the girl hiding behind the pastry case, thankful for crumbs. She had to think she'd gotten above me. However, I had long since ceased portraying that role. Actually, I've always despised Alexandra Reed's reality. At social events, I didn't require the title of senior director or gold-embossed business cards. I desired an effect. Autonomy was what I desired. Both were mine. On weekdays, I was buried in receipts from the bakery as I helped my mom make the switch to online ordering, and on weekends, I was working on a merger that would alter the course of community financing forever. I attended board meetings in my yoga pants and financial briefings in my flats, and I responded to no one. That is the advantage of constructing incognito. The moment you move, everyone thinks you're just standing there. By then, it's too late for them to catch up. Our legal counsel called me the week prior to the change. We were getting close to the last round of negotiations. Assuming everything went according to plan, Alderon Capital would become Harrington and Vale's controlling shareholder. Alexandra Reed's esteemed firm, that is correct. It was nearly poetic in its irony. She could have heard from me. I could have sent her an NDA in a gift bag and watched her gasp in shock, but I refrained from doing so. Silence can be more painful than outright confrontation, so I waited. I also knew that the invitation that would set everything in motion was on its way. Alexandra Reed said one evening as we were washing dishes at our parents' house, I have a favor to ask. I'm hosting a formal gala next month. It's for my promotion. Big deal, lots of partners. Would you help coordinate the food? I know you're good with event stuff. She didn't mean it as a compliment. I was about to respond when Mom clapped. That's perfect. Rose is amazing with logistics. It'll be flawless. Alexandra Reed shot me a look that read, remain where you are. In response, I shot her a look that read, gladly. Absolutely, I assured them. I'd be happy to help. Both the casserole dish and the burden of my sister's condescension weighed me down as I left that dinner. I was handed the stage by Alexandra Reed, and she had no idea. She believed she was relegating me to my proper place, relegating me to my usual spot near the tablecloths and trays rather than the podiums or the power. However, I had no plans to correct her. At this time, no. I was washing dishes at my mom's sink that night when my phone rang and a name came up. I stopped what I was doing. Harrington and Vale CEO Jonathan Pierce, who is Alexandra Reed's boss. Victoria, according to the message, I've been informed you're the founder of Alderon Capital. Would love to meet. I'll be attending our internal celebration next month. If you'll be there, perhaps we can connect in person. The delightful symmetry was difficult for me to comprehend at first. Unbeknownst to her, Alexandra Reed had asked me to cater an event where her boss planned to meet the woman who would eventually become his business partner. I fixed my gaze on the illuminated screen before shifting to the mirror inside the microwave. I was being called a person of consequence instead of someone's sister while wearing a flower-stained sweatshirt and having my hair tied back. I was slow to reply to the email. No, it was unnecessary. In its place, I poured a glass of water, rested my back against the counter, and allowed the silence to envelop me, like the quiet just before the curtain rises. Alexa Reed sent me a barrage of passive-aggressive texts regarding caterers, menu items, and expected delivery dates over the course of the following several weeks. Make sure the hors d'oeuvres are upscale, according to her. Anything that seems overly homemade is the last thing I need. Overly homemade. Like our childhood. Like myself. Professionally brief, I responded. Noted. Confirmed. All set. In the meantime, I collaborated with my CFO and legal team to meticulously and quietly complete the acquisition. Finally, with every document signed and every clause secured, our vision became clearer. It would be more than just a merger. A reckoning would ensue. My longtime partner Daniel Brooks saw the strain in my shoulders as I prepared my black dress 3 nights prior to the event. As he observed me from the doorway, he asked, "Are you sure you wish to proceed with this? You don't have to play along just to prove something." I remarked, "I'm not proving anything," as I ran my fingers through the fabric. With a sigh, Daniel Brooks said, "I'm just showing up." She is unworthy of this degree of elegance, Ro. No, I whispered back. But I do. I deserve to walk into that room without shame, without needing to explain or justify anything. I'm not doing this to humiliate her. I turned to look at him. I'm doing it so she never confuses silence with weakness again. His response was non-existent. I sent Alexandra Reed my last message the evening prior to the gala. She responded with a thumbs up emoji, saying, "All vendors confirmed. Timing in place. I'll be on site at 5:30 p.m. And I grinned. Everything had finally come together. Serving was the only remaining task. I was precisely where Alexandra Reed wanted me to be, in the kitchen, as the lights of the Whitmore estate glistened like a dream she had choreographed, complete with crystal glasses, a string quartet, ice sculptures that would melt before dessert, and so on. The catering crew was to be supervised by me, as assigned by Alexandra Reed. I was reminded to remain in the background by her sharp and sweet voice. A nod came from me. Certainly so. Her lips slipped out my name like stain-causing perfume as I made my way through the party, tray in hand. "That's my sister, Victoria Hayes," she informed the executive group. A few gentle giggles ensued as the speaker continued. "She's helping out. Always loved the hospitality stuff. Poor thing." As always, my mom chimed in. "We tried to include her, of course. She chose her path. Until I sent that text, no one paid any attention to it. Deal closed, 54% effective immediately." Jonathan Pierce showed up not long after. With an air of effortless elegance, Alexandra Reed dashed over. With a furrowed brow, he glanced around the room before nodding and saying, "Mr. Pierce, we're honored." "Oh, never mind her," Alexandra Reed reassured. "That's my sister, just helping the staff." To which Jonathan Pierce responded, "Wait, before moving forward." I smiled and relinquished my tray, saying, "That's Victoria Hayes." His eyes widened as he said, "Hello, Jonathan. I'm glad you made it." His laughter reflected his relief. Alexandra Reed blinked as she said, "Serving drinks at your own party? I suppose this is how you keep people humble." Jonathan Pierce smoothly explained, "Miss Victoria Hayes is the CEO of Alderon Capital. As of 20 minutes ago, she owns controlling interest in Harrington and Vale." Then, the speaker continued, "What are you talking about?" Jonathan Pierce chuckled, "And runs the company that now owns your department." Our mother went pale as she whispered, "There must be a mistake." Alexandra Reed's glass shattered as the room froze. My voice was low but audible as I faced Alexandra Reed and said, "You teased me for years, left me feeling like an outsider. No one ever inquired as to what I was devising. Why didn't you tell me? You just thought it didn't matter," Daniel Brooks said, his voice trailing off as he approached the woman. "Why?" "Because I was curious if you would still hold me in high regard even without the title." "It seems you were mistaken." After clearing his throat, Jonathan Pierce asked, "Shall we formally announce it?" "I thought you had a speech ready," Alexandra Reed said as I turned to her, and I nodded enthusiastically. "Would you like to proceed with giving it anyway?" She bolted from the room. My father stood by the bar, speechless, drink in hand, as my mother chased after Alexandra Reed, her heels clacking like thunder against the marble. I took up a champagne glass, delicately tapped it and said, "If I may have your attention." The room went silent after the announcement, and whispers grew louder than static. People were looking at me with a mix of sympathy and anxiety. I mildly chuckled and responded, "Not hostile, just overdue." Jonathan Pierce leaned in for a firm handshake and leaned out to say, "That was the most graceful hostile takeover I've ever witnessed." His smile was almost poetic. "Victoria, you really built all of this?" Daniel Brooks asked as he cautiously approached, his pale face betraying his reluctance to speak out. The guests murmured and awkwardly resumed their drink consumption. I stated it directly, "I did. Why didn't you inform me?" I looked for signs of the man I had imagined on his face, "But you never spoke a word as your family insulted me, and that made me realize something. You never deserved me as a CEO if you couldn't defend me as a baker," he said, his jaw clenching. With a step back, I said, "Love without respect is theater, and I'm done performing." He then reached for my hand and said, "Then you should have respected me." I continued, "But I love you." Alexandra Reed re-entered the room with her makeup fixed but her eyes wide. "You humiliated me," she whispered, "in front of my clients, my mentors, my team." I turned away at that moment. "No," I spoke in a level-headed manner. "You absolutely embarrassed yourself. I simply ceased providing cover for you," she said, folding her arms. "All right, it's time for me to step down. Not with you as my boss. You get to decide. Yet, be aware of this before you depart. What happened tonight is already known by every major firm in Miami. Nothing will ever go away from the way you talked about me and others like me." Bravado started to crumble as Alexandra Reed hesitated and asked, "What do you want from me?" "Starting Monday, you will be collaborating with our Community Impact Division. I want you to learn," I continued, my voice trailing off as she appeared perplexed. "We're starting a program to help minority-owned businesses and local eateries. You'll be assisting them with their financial restructuring." "And to whom will I be answering?" she inquired with a hint of bitterness. Our project manager, my mom, gave me a smile. Not because of a failure in another endeavor, but out of her own free will, she continues to run the bakery. While Alexandra Reed was about to respond, our mother spoke up. "Victoria, maybe we could talk about this privately," she whispered, her voice unsteady, adding, "We're family." I slowly spun around. "Relatives? You made me sit with the help, removed me from photos, and whispered as if I didn't exist for years. I don't know when I stopped being a family member. We had no idea you were wealthy," my mom said, her eyes swelling up. That's the issue, I whispered, you believed my value was contingent upon financial compensation. Victoria has every reason to turn away from us, my father said, and the entire room turned. It was the first time I had ever heard him speak up. This happened while I did nothing. It was the longest thing he had ever said in a single breath, and it was about how we had forgotten what was important. With a step toward me, he said, we failed you. I know. I told Alexandra Reed as I nodded, not with pride, but with clarity. Show up early Monday morning at the bakery, Mom will not abide tardiness. I didn't linger for farewells, I just departed. As the guests dispersed, the Whitmore estate seemed less like a victory and more like a museum after closing, beautiful, but empty. The night air was heavy with the aroma of citrus and salt. I hopped into my car and my phone rang. Dad, drop by the bakery, it said. I didn't think twice before saying, on my way. Your mom had saved you a plate. My mother stood at the counter, still in her gala heels, with a faded apron tied around her waist. You're early, she said gently, and 25 minutes later I stepped through the back door of our family bakery. The lights were low, but the scent of cinnamon and dough lingered like a promise. Old habits. As I routinely wiped down the front counter with a cloth, my father entered from the back with empanadas. We sat down to eat, and for the first time in a long time, there was a peacefulness. It wasn't a masking of pain, but a healing silence. Do you still return to this place? In astonishment, my mom inquired. I said, always. It helps me remember who I am. She looked at me for a moment before saying, I misjudged you. You simply believed what was easiest to see, I whispered. No. With heavy eyes, she nodded and said, you're not angry. I was, I confessed. However, being angry is draining. I'd prefer to construct. We discussed Alexandra Reed, the bakery, and what to expect on Monday, when she started working under our mom's supervision at her new job. Mom assured her that her daughter would eventually learn. Or she won't, said I. But either way, she'll face herself. Silence isn't weakness, it's knowing when to speak so that what you say is remembered. People had accused me of being weak because I was quiet and invisible because I was kind. I stood behind the counter again before I left, this time tracing the old register with my fingers. Clarity, not vengeance, was all I ever wanted, and I finally got it tonight. Keep going. Keep showing up. Let them talk. Let them doubt. Because when the noise goes, the truth and you will be the only things that remain. So, keep building if you've ever been underestimated or pushed to the side. My aunt refused me 5 days to bury my father and threatened to cut my inheritance, so that same night, I legally pulled the plug on her $4.06 empire and took it all back. A long time ago, your father severed relations with this family. This weekend, we have the Titan migration, which is worth $4.6 million. If you go out to mourn a dead man, don't bother returning, and think of your grandfather's bequest as irrevocably lost. My Aunt Victoria Sterling, head of our family business, texted me as I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. Bypassing any basic human empathy, she treated my father's death as a frustrating scheduling conflict. My name is Chloe Bennett, and I just turned 33. On paper, I ran my own independent tech firm for the last 6 years, but in reality, I was the invisible spine supporting my family's entire corporate empire. I was standing outside a hospital room with a plastic bag containing my dad's watch and house keys inside. I wrote the core code and built the server architecture from scratch. They took the massive salaries and the industry credit. Every time I asked for fair compensation, they weaponized our bloodline. Aunt Victoria Sterling sat in a corner office on the 42nd floor, surrounded by imported marble. My cousin Ethan Sterling paraded around with a vice president title, wearing custom suits paid for by the company. They referred to my unpaid work as a family obligation, but my dad was the anti-hero. He was the black sheep of the family, the owner of a small clock repair shop in rural Wisconsin, where he spent his days bent over a wooden workbench, surrounded by the aroma of oil and black coffee. From him, I learned patience and the importance of building something worth having. Victoria Sterling lived like a queen, secretly over-leveraging every single company asset to support her lifestyle. The public had no idea that her impeccably run empire had a rotting foundation. I oversaw the data gateways. Every day, desperate, garbled wire transfers came across my screen. I entered her glass-walled office later that afternoon, clutching a glossy funeral home brochure, and found that she had personally guaranteed a massive loan to hide her tracks. The $4.06 million Titan migration was not just an ordinary upgrade, it was her lifeline. If the migration failed, the bank would go into default and take her mansions, cars, and prized CEO title. I begged for precisely 5 days off 5 days to attend my father's funeral as Ethan Sterling scowled at the mahogany doorframe. Victoria Sterling glanced up from her computer and slammed that cruel ultimatum in my face. Her cruelty hurt, but her frantic jaw twitching revealed more than just arrogance. As I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table every Thanksgiving, I could feel the crushing, raw panic of an executive cornered financially, terrified that her underpaid niece was going to unintentionally turn off her entire false life. Victoria Sterling, who never looked my way, would hold out her empty wine glass, waiting for me to refill it. Looking at the frantic twitch in her jaw, the obedience completely evaporated. Now I am the one holding the hammer, but back then I was the hired help, the quiet, obedient niece who fixed their server crashes at 3:30 inches the morning and swallowed their condescending jokes. They broke my spirit. Stepping inside my dad's clock shop, I was immediately grounded by the familiar scent of sawdust, old oil, and black coffee. I gave her a single slow nod and pretended not to notice. Understood, I murmured. Turning on my heel, I strode out of the glass building. I placed my laptop on his wooden workbench. The software's architecture is mine, and my independent company has the copyright. The family business had only been able to access it for 6 years with a vendor access key that I had given them for free. I went into my administrator dashboard, found the active vendor licenses, and with a single click, I legally revoked their access for violating the terms of service. After that, I changed the path of their entire client portal, swapping out their expensive, modern interface for an ugly, permanent error message that reads, "Service suspended. Management has violated legal and license requirements." Bullies, like Victoria Sterling, exude an intimidating air of total control. They yell, threaten, and make you feel like your future is in their hands. However, their vast empire is nothing more than a mirage. It is constructed on the invisible, exhausted labor of the very people they despise. The moment you realize your value and lawfully withdraw your thoughts, actions, and code, the illusion crumbles, and they are immediately exposed. Without my unpaid labor, Victoria Sterling was nothing more than a nervous, expensive suit-wearing dweeb who couldn't even turn on her own office router. Within that 4.2-story glass tower, 15 meters away, all of the monitors went dark at the same time. The Titan migration, which cost $4.6 million, stalled. My phone went into overdrive, wailing uncontrollably against the wooden desk. In just 2 minutes, Ethan Sterling sent 18 text messages, which flooded my screen with blocks of frantically capitalized letters. The servers went down, the Titan client was locked out, and the entire system was inaccessible. I quickly swiped the notifications away, but then I saw Victoria Sterling's name flash across the screen. I answered the call on the third ring, put it on speaker, and placed it next to my dad's chilly soldering iron. I allowed her to scream until she gasped for air, and for 3 excruciating seconds, the stillness lingered in the dusty air as she demanded that I fix the glitch right away, threatened to sue me for corporate sabotage, and said that she would drown my independent company in legal fees until I went bankrupt. "I just texted you a payment link. My consulting rate is $1,250 an hour," I said with a deadpan tone. She stumbled over her words as she threatened to explain to the board of directors an unauthorized emergency vendor expense unless they immediately put a $15,000 retainer on the corporate credit card. Otherwise, the screens will remain black. The line went dead, and I returned to sorting the small screws in my dad's toolbox. After an hour, I heard heavy tires crunch on the gravel driveway outside, and flashing red and blue lights reflected off the grimy windows of the shop, revealing that she did not own the software that ran her own business. The 2 police cruisers parked diagonally in front of my car were a direct result of Victoria Sterling's escalation. She had weaponized the local police in her desperate attempt to conceal her financial ruin from the investors. She had falsely accused me of cyber terrorism and corporate property theft, and she had dispatched armed officers to my house during my mourning period. She had counted on the intimidation of flashy badges and the prospect of handcuffs to break me. She thought that a scared, grieving girl would simply surrender the code to the authorities, which would make them disappear. I pried open the front door and saw 2 uniformed officers standing on my porch, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. I retrieved a single manila folder from the entryway drawer and presented it to the lead officer. The folder contained the state-certified business registration and the federal copyright patent for the software architecture. The documents were stamped and dated 4 years prior to my logging into the family servers. They demanded immediate access to my hardware, citing a felony report of corporate theft. After reviewing the pages, the officer compared the vendor identification to the police report, closed the folder, and returned it to me. At this point, my phone remained on the console table, and Victoria Sterling was on speakerphone, clearly anticipating my surrender as the lead officer dipped his head toward the microphone. "This is a disagreement over a civil contract, ma'am." His voice froze and fell an octave. "I will personally visit your office and place you under arrest for making an inaccurate police report and abusing city resources, if you utilize the emergency dispatch system to evade payment to a vendor on a subsequent occasion. Stay away from this woman at all costs." He personally pressed the end call button, and the cruisers withdrew from my driveway, taking Victoria Sterling's final desperate threat with them. The real trap was about to close. I had neglected to compose an email to the board of directors. Instead, I had the client destroy everything. At precisely 3:30, The Titan Dynamics executives began their $4.6 million data migration through the portal. They encountered my hard-coded error screen, where they read legal and license violation. Panic is contagious, so they immediately dialed the family board of directors, threatening to annul their entire contract and sue the family empire for gross negligence. As the crisis meeting took place in the boardroom, Victoria Sterling sat atop the long mahogany table, perspiring profusely and her hands trembling with each click of her mouse. Ethan Sterling, meanwhile, recoiled into his leather chair, staring vacantly at his pricey shoes, remaining speechless as the investors pressed for an accounting of events. As she stood before the Titan Dynamics board and the billionaires who owned the company's software, Victoria Sterling had no choice but to confess. She had lied to the shareholders. She had lied on the bank loan applications, and she had just set in motion a multi-million-dollar breach of contract by refusing to allow her niece to bury her father. Being the untouchable matriarch had been her entire identity. Now, with her makeup smudged, her voice cracking, and her pleading for a second chance from men who were solely concerned with profits, the board held an emergency vote in the room and immediately stripped Victoria Sterling of her chief executive title. Their empire crumbled before dinner as they immediately dissolved Ethan Sterling's shares as VP. That same afternoon, Victoria Sterling was escorted out of the glass lobby by security. She left through the revolving doors with only a single cardboard box. Not even the vice president's son and her custom designer suits could save her from the millions of dollars in personal debt she now faced on her own. The following morning, I received a call from the board of directors, who had disregarded the family line entirely in favor of a multi-year, extremely profitable licensing agreement with my independent company. The Titan deal had survived, but the family empire, as Victoria Sterling understood it, had crumbled. Thursday morning was brisk and clear. Looking down at the fresh earth, a strange, overwhelming calm washed over me as I stood in the peaceful, grassy cemetery in rural Wisconsin. A small group of Dad's old friends had gathered around his plain wooden coffin, but no one from the corporate tower had shown up. They were too preoccupied with fending off bankruptcy lawyers to act as if they cared. Standing there, the truth struck me with absolute clarity. Leaving Victoria Sterling and Ethan Sterling was not an act of cruelty. People always tell you that turning your back on family is the ultimate sin. We are conditioned to endure abuse, to keep showing up at holiday dinners, and to bleed ourselves dry just to keep the peace. The pinnacle of self-respect was severing that cord. Unwavering allegiance to a poisonous lineage is merely a polite cover for betrayal. I did not light a match to bring their empire crashing down. Rather, I removed my hands from its supports and allowed the tremendous weight of their hubris to crush them. At that precise moment, I paid homage to my father's real legacy. The liquidation of the family holding company was finalized 5 months later by the federal bankruptcy court. In order to avoid federal prison, Aunt Victoria Sterling accepted a harsh plea deal, which included 6 years of strict probation and a court-ordered restitution of $3,200,000. She was formally indicted on 3 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of falsifying corporate records to secure the $5.2 million commercial loan. As a result of the devastating social fallout, her membership in the exclusive country club she had come to regard as her personal kingdom was quietly revoked. Her once privileged social circle suddenly lost touch with her, and her cousin Ethan Sterling was compelled to sell his custom sports cars at public auction. He is now employed as a mid-level data entry clerk, reporting directly to a manager who is half his age. 2 pages of flowing cursive, dripping with manufactured nostalgia, describing how much she missed our family dinners, arrived in my mailbox 8 months after the funeral in a pale pink envelope. The return address belonged to a modest apartment complex across the city. On the other hand, she claimed that my father would want us to make up, and that the only reason she was so hard on me was because she saw my potential. As I stood at my kitchen counter, clutching the thick parchment paper, I felt a tremendous weight lifted off my chest, and I folded the letter in half before throwing it in the trash. After winning the direct Titan contract, my independent firm grew quickly, hiring 15 new engineers, relocating to a beautiful office space, and establishing a culture based on mutual respect. The biggest win, though, is that I finally get to spend my weekends how I want. No angry reply, no closure text, just absolute, deafening silence. We ate off mismatched plates. We laughed until our ribs ached. Not a single person asked me to sacrifice my peace for their profit. This Thanksgiving, I hosted a dinner for my chosen family, which included my lead developer, my college roommate, my husband, and my dad's old buddies from the clock repair shop. People will stare you down and tell you blood is thicker than water, but what they don't tell you is that toxic people will use that very idea as a weapon to get you to do their bidding, comply with their every command, and eventually lose your mind. Society teaches us that family is sacred and unbreakable. They don't care about you, they care about how useful you are. If you're sick of dealing with entitled individuals, make a note of these 3 rules. First, your DNA is just a biological fact, not an excuse for someone to treat you poorly forever. Having a common last name is no guarantee that you will have good mental health, financial security, or peace of mind. Second rule: all it takes to be truly powerful is to be able to stop doing the invisible work that bullies do for you. No screaming, no vicious vengeance, just a clean, quiet exit from cleaning up after them. Bullies hate personal boundaries because they can't survive without stepping on yours. The third rule is that peace is expensive, but staying costs your soul. I regained my autonomy after losing my grandfather's inheritance and the illusion of a loving family. Have you ever been the dedicated fixer for someone who would dump you the second you put your own life first? What invisible, unpaid labor are you giving up today? Leave a comment with 500 if you've ever had to leave toxic bloodlines to save yourself. Share this story with someone who needs the courage to finally send their own invoice. My name is Chloe Bennett, and I am finally completely free. At my father's funeral, a teacher sent me a video of my wife's family breaking my daughter's fingers. Now, let us begin. The November rain pelted the chapel windows as Daniel Harper stood beside his father's mahogany casket, listening to a minister who had never met the old man recite generic platitudes. His father collapsed in his workshop 36 hours ago, and he left before the ambulance arrived. Daniel stood in a borrowed suit, numb, as relatives he barely recognized expressed their condolences. His phone vibrated again. Again. He ignored it. Everyone knew you turned off your phone at funerals, but it kept buzzing with an insistence that felt wrong. His stomach dropped when the name of his daughter Lily's teacher, Madison Clark, appeared on the screen for the third time. Daniel stepped outside into the rain, without bothering with an umbrella. "Miss Clark, Mr. Harper." Her voice shook. "I'm sorry for calling during your father's funeral, but God, I don't know what to say. I found something on the school's server." Lily accidentally uploaded it to her cloud drive. "The school system automatically synchronizes everything. I need to show you. I am legally obligated to report this, but I wanted you to see it first. What do you see? I am sending it now. I'm very sorry." A video file appeared. Daniel's hands trembled when he opened it. The playroom seemed familiar. His wife Victoria's childhood home, which her mother, Eleanor Whitmore, kept as a shrine. But what he saw caused his knees to buckle. His 10-year-old son, Grant, was screaming while strapped to a chair. And around him were 8 people he recognized: his wife's family, the Whitmore clan. Eleanor Whitmore, the matriarch, held a phone while filming. Her sister, Margaret Collins, stood beside her, expressionless. Victoria's brothers, Lucas, Aaron, and Julian Whitmore, took turns. They began with the pinky finger on his left hand. The video timestamp indicated that it happened 3 days ago, while Daniel was on a flight to Chicago for his father's emergency. Daniel rose and watched as they broke each finger one by one. His son's screams became hoarsorrow, then whimpers. They joked and laughed. When they reached the thumbs, Victoria stepped forward with pliers. "Final touch," she added, smiling at the camera for being such a little snitch. The video ended. Daniel stood in the rain, the water combining with something else on his face. A group chat appeared below the video. The Whitmore family has only 15 members. They had shared and celebrated it. His wife's cousin, Savannah Brooks, had responded, "It's about time someone taught that brat respect." Daniel's phone displayed the time, 3:11 blasts per centimeter. His father's funeral would proceed without him. He made 4 telephone calls. The first was to his lawyer. The second was to someone he'd testified against 14 years earlier. A man who had walked because Daniel's testimony had not been as conclusive as the prosecution required. A man owed him for the careful wording. The third call was for an airport read-eye to Portland tonight, but I need 3 seats 17 hours earlier. Daniel Harper had dedicated his life to reading people. He'd been a forensic psychologist for 17 years, sitting across from murderers, rapists, and monsters, learning to see through their masks. He testified in 51 trials. He'd never been wrong about guilt, but he'd been horribly wrong about one person, Victoria. They'd met at a hospital benefit 10 years prior. He thought she'd been a pediatric nurse, soft-spoken and gentle. She came from a big, close-knit family. Daniel envied his upbringing as an only child. The Gibbs family, Sunday dinners, group vacations, and the ongoing support system. Everything had seemed so warm. He is now sitting in the airport terminal, waiting for his flight to board. Daniel understood what he had seen. A cult. Eleanor Whitmore was the matriarch, and her words were binding. Victoria's father died when she was 13, and Eleanor raised 6 children on her own, ruling with an iron fist wrapped in false sweetness. The family had always closed ranks around itself. Any outsider was simply tolerated. Daniel has been tolerated. His phone vibrated. Lily was calling from his sister-in-law's house, where he had sent both children following Madison Clark's call. He only told Lily that he needed her and Grant to be safe, and that he'd explain everything soon. "Dad." Lily's voice was tiny. She was 13, old enough to realize something terrible had happened. "Is Grant okay?" "He will not speak to me." His hands. "I understand, sweetheart. He'll be okay." I promise. Daniel kept his voice steady, even though each word cost him. You are safe wherever you are. Stay there until I come for you. Where's Mom? Daniel closed his eyes. I do not know yet. It was a lie. He knew precisely where Victoria was. At her mother's house, most likely sitting around the dinner table with the same people who tortured their son, acting as if nothing happened. The third call he'd made was to Mateo Cruz, a man most people would never approach. Mateo operated a very specific type of problem-solving business in the Pacific Northwest. Daniel evaluated him 14 years ago during a murder trial. The prosecution relied on Daniel's psychological profile to prove premeditation. Daniel had witnessed the truth. Mateo had killed the man who was trafficking his younger sister. The killing was brutal, but not premeditated. It had been a defensive rage. Daniel's testimony had raised enough doubts. Mateo walked for a lower charge. I need a favor, Daniel said during the call. Name it. Mateo's voice carried the weight of someone who had paid his debts. I'm coming to Portland. I need two things: access to an isolated house and someone who understands pain management. A pause. How much pain are we talking about? 9 people's worth. They harmed my son. Another pause. This time, the duration is longer. Please text me the details. I will have everything ready. Daniel planned to bring a fourth person who was not a person in any legal sense. It was evidence, years of it. Because Daniel Harper had done something that his wife was unaware of. He had been documenting minor details. At first, the way Victoria's family treated Grant differently than Lily, the odd comments, and the times Grant flinched around his mother's relatives. Daniel dismissed it as paranoia, a hazard of his job. He'd been wrong, and now he had 4 years' worth of notes, observations, and recordings from the nanny cam he'd installed in the living room after Grant developed a stutter at the age of 7. Nothing as damning as what Madison Clark discovered, but patterns. Proof that it wasn't the first time, just that they were stupid enough to record it. His flight boarded. Daniel took his seat, pulled out his laptop, and began devising a plan. The Gibbs family made 3 critical mistakes. First, they documented the crime. Second, they assumed Daniel was the mild-mannered psychologist who smiled at family dinners and let Eleanor Whitmore dictate every vacation itinerary. Third, they were unaware of Daniel's previous life before becoming a psychologist. Daniel had spent 5 years in a very different world prior to graduate school, career, and respectable life. He had been the youngest investigator in the district attorney's office in Chicago, focusing on organized crime. He'd learned how criminal organizations worked, how they protected themselves, and how they collapsed. He had seen men destroy their enemies with precision rather than violence. Legal, social, and psychological warfare are combined. He had left that world because the darkness had begun to seep in. He'd become a psychologist to help people understand their problems and become better people. However, some skills have never vanished, they just waited. As the plane took off, Daniel opened a document and started typing. There were 8 names, and 8 family members had participated. He excluded the younger cousins who had only watched. They were children as well as victims of Eleanor's influence. But the 8 adults who touched his son, hurt him, and recorded it all belonged to him. The first chapter of Daniel's plan began with Cole Bennett, a man most people would never associate with Daniel Harper. Cole was a private investigator, but not one who followed cheating spouses. He specialized in digital forensics and had a knack for discovering things people wanted buried. Daniel first met Cole in a custody case 6 years ago, when Cole's testimony about digital evidence saved a father from false accusations. They had kept in touch, sharing the occasional beer and war stories. When Cole answered his call from the Portland airport, Daniel said, I need everything for 8 people. I need criminal records, financial histories, medical records, and social media for the past decade by tomorrow. That is a tall order. They tortured my 10-year-old son on video while I buried my father. Silence. Then please send me the names. You will have it in 18 hours. Daniel's plan was not simple vengeance. It was architecture. Each piece had to fit perfectly because, once he began, there would be no turning back. The Whitmore family had spent decades developing their closed system, their ideal little world, in which Eleanor's word was law and outsiders were beneath them. Daniel was going to disassemble it from the inside out. Mateo Cruz met him outside baggage claim, driving a black pickup truck. He was 45 now, graying at the temples but carrying himself like the street fighter he used to be. The house is ready, Mateo explained as they drove. 55 minutes outside Portland. There are no neighbors for 3 miles. Basement is soundproof. The previous owner was a musician, believe it or not. And I found your pain specialist, Dr. Leonard Hayes, a retired anesthesiologist. He lost his license 6 years ago after his daughter died from an overdose, and he began asking too many questions about the pharmaceutical company that manufactured her pills. He has a grudge against those who abuse children. Daniel nodded slowly. Perfect. They arrived at the house at dusk. It sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by pine trees, just as Mateo promised. Doctor. Leonard Hayes was setting up equipment in what had previously been a basement recording studio. Hayes was 63 years old, thin, and moved with precision. He looked up as Daniel entered. Mateo explained what they did. "I want to be clear. I'm not here to kill anyone, but I can make sure they get every second they deserve." Daniel said, "That is exactly what I need." He took out his laptop and opened the video file. "I need you to watch this. All of it," Hayes observed. His expression remained unchanged until the end. Victoria broke Grant's thumbs, and his jaw clenched. "How old is your son?" 10. "My daughter was 22 when she died, but she had been addicted since she was 14. I started with pills to treat a sports injury. The company was aware of their addictive potential. They didn't care." Hayes shut the laptop. "I'll help you. Whatever you need." Cole Bennett's report arrived at midnight. Daniel sat in the house's kitchen, reading through each profile and gaining a better understanding of the enemy. Eleanor Whitmore, aged 70, was the matriarch. A retired elementary school principal. 3 marriages, 2 divorced, and 1 widowed. Following the death of her third husband, she raised 6 children on her own. The family adored her, but Cole had discovered something intriguing: a sealed juvenile record from 1978, when Eleanor was 18. She had been charged with assault on a younger foster sibling. Although the case had been dismissed and the record had been sealed, the pattern remained. Eleanor's younger sister, Margaret Collins, 65, worked as a court clerk, divorced with no children. She was the one holding Grant's other arm in the video. Cole's research revealed that she had been fired from 2 previous jobs for interpersonal conflicts and a pattern of complaints about her treatment of subordinates. Everything settled quietly. Daniel's wife, Victoria Harper, 36, is the woman he believed he knew. Cole had also found her juvenile records, another sealed file from when she was 16. Assault against a classmate. Eleanor had made it disappear, as she had done with everything else. Lucas Whitmore, Eleanor's 44-year-old son, has 2 DUIs that have all been reduced to reckless driving. Cole discovered the traffic court records, as well as the judge in both cases, who had attended the same school as Eleanor. The connections went deep. Aaron Whitmore, 41, worked in construction. 2 assault charges were dropped after witnesses recanted. Cole had discovered the witness' current addresses. Daniel made a note to contact them. Julian Whitmore, 37, managed a car dealership. His clean record made him the most dangerous. He was wise enough not to get caught. But Cole had discovered his social media posts, which were lengthy rants about discipline, how modern parents were too soft, and how children required old-fashioned correction. The remaining 3 participants were cousins. Savannah Brooks, Margaret's 34-year-old daughter, Claire Donovan, 40, and Vanessa Ramirez, 42. Each had an individual history of complaints, incidents, and patterns. Daniel read everything twice and committed it to memory. Then he started to plan. The next morning, Daniel drove to the Whitmores' home. He didn't call ahead. He wanted an element of surprise. Eleanor answered the door with a sympathetic expression on her face. "Daniel. Oh, darling, we did not expect you to return so soon. How was your father's funeral? Come inside. Come inside." Daniel didn't move. "Where is Grant?" "Grant?" Eleanor's face showed perfect confusion. "Why? He's upstairs with Victoria. They came for Sunday breakfast. You know, we always do Sunday breakfast. Get him now." Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. "Daniel, you're upset. That's understandable. Losing your father," I said. "Get my son now." The door opened wider. Victoria appeared, and Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. She looked normal, concerned, like a loving wife worried about her grieving husband. "Daniel. Honey, what's wrong? Show me your hands." Victoria glanced at her mother, then back at Daniel. "What? Show me your hands." Slowly, Victoria extended her hands. They were unmarked. No bruises from wielding pliers. No signs of the violence Daniel had watched on video. "Where is Grant?" Daniel asked again. "He's napping. He hasn't been feeling well." Victoria moved to touch Daniel's arm. He jerked away. "Daniel, you're scaring me. Get him, or I'm calling the police." Eleanor's expression hardened now. "Daniel, there's no need for threats. We're family. If you're upset about something, I know what you did." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Eleanor's face went blank. Victoria took a step back. "I don't know what you're talking about," Eleanor said. Daniel pulled out his phone, tapped play on the video. The sound of Grant screaming filled the doorway. To their credit, neither woman flinched. They watched the video with the same expressions Daniel had seen on criminals he'd evaluated: cold assessment, calculating their options. When it ended, Eleanor smiled. "That video is clearly fabricated. Anyone can do that with computers these days. If you're having some kind of breakdown, Grant," Daniel shouted past them into the house. "Grant." He heard footsteps. His son appeared at the top of the stairs, and Daniel's heart broke all over again. Grant's hands were wrapped in bandages. His face was pale, eyes hollow. "Dad." Grant's voice was small. Daniel pushed past Eleanor and Victoria, taking the stairs two at a time. He knelt in front of his son. "It's okay, I'm here, you're safe now." "I didn't tell anyone," Grant whispered. "I promise I didn't tell. They said if I told, it would be worse." "Told what?" Daniel kept his voice gentle. Grant glanced down the stairs, where Eleanor and Victoria stood watching. "About what Grandma makes me do, the punishments. When I'm bad." Daniel felt something crack inside him. "You're not bad, you've never been bad." He lifted Grant carefully. "We're leaving." "Daniel, you can't just take him," Victoria started. "Watch me." Eleanor stepped forward. "If you leave with that boy, I'll call the police. I'll tell them you're having a psychotic break. That you're dangerous. You forget, Daniel. I know people. I was a principal for 28 years. I know every social worker, every judge, every cop in this city. You take Grant, and you'll never see either of your children again." Daniel stopped, turned, and smiled. It was the smile he'd learned to do during interrogations, the one that made hardened criminals uncomfortable. "You're right, you do know people. But you made one mistake." He shifted Grant in his arms. "You filmed it, and you posted it to a group chat. That's 8 counts of child abuse, 8 counts of conspiracy. And in Oregon, that's 25 years minimum per count. Federal charges, if we prove it crossed state lines, which it did. Claire lives in Washington." Eleanor's smile didn't waver. "That video won't hold up. I have lawyers, better than the FBI's digital forensics team, because that's who has the original file now. I forwarded it from Lily's teacher's account. It's already in their system. My lawyer filed a protective order this morning. You're done, Eleanor." For the first time, Daniel saw fear flicker across the matriarch's face. He carried Grant out to his rental car. Victoria followed, grabbing his arm. "Daniel, please. You don't understand. He needed discipline. He's been lying, sneaking around. He's 10 years old. My mother knows how to handle children. I trust her judgment." Daniel stared at his wife, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. "You broke our son's thumbs with pliers while your mother filmed it. It was just a lesson to teach him. Get away from us. If you come near Grant or Lily again, I'll kill you myself." He didn't wait for her response. He drove. By the time Daniel reached the safe house, Grant had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted from pain and trauma. Dr. Leonard Hayes met them at the door. "Let me see his hands," Hayes said gently, and Daniel watched as the doctor carefully unwrapped the bandages. The damage was systematic. Each finger had been broken at the second joint, both thumbs broken at the base. Someone with medical knowledge had done this enough to cause maximum pain without causing permanent damage. A message, not just violence. "Can you fix it?" Daniel asked. "The bones will heal. With proper care, he'll regain full function, but the psychological trauma." Hayes looked up. "That's your department." Daniel nodded. He knew. He'd spent years studying childhood trauma. He knew what lay ahead: nightmares, trust issues, anxiety, years of therapy, maybe a lifetime of it. And the people who'd done this were sitting in Eleanor's house right now, probably planning their next move. His phone vibrated. Cole Bennett. "I found something else," Cole said. "Eleanor's first husband. The one who died when Victoria was 13. I pulled a death certificate. Cause of death, accidental fall down basement stairs. That's not unusual." "No, but I found the police report. He had defensive bruises on his arms." The investigating officer noted it was suspicious, but the case was closed quickly. The medical examiner who signed off, same one who handled 3 other questionable deaths in the family over the years: Eleanor's second husband, her brother-in-law, and a foster child who was staying with them. Daniel's blood ran cold. "How many people has she killed?" "I don't know, but Daniel, whatever you're planning, be careful. This woman isn't just abusive. She's a serial killer who's been covering her tracks for 45 years. After Cole hung up, Daniel sat in the safe house kitchen while Mateo made coffee and Hayes checked Grant's vitals in the next room. The rage that had been building since he'd seen that video crystallized into something colder, more focused. Eleanor Whitmore had spent decades perfecting her system. She'd raised children to be her weapons, taught them that violence was love, that control was care. She'd gotten away with it because she'd chosen her victims carefully: children who couldn't fight back, family members who were isolated, people who depended on her. But Daniel wasn't a victim. He wasn't isolated. And he'd spent 17 years studying people exactly like Eleanor. He knew her weaknesses now: her pride, her need for control, her belief that she was untouchable. He was going to use every one of them. Mateo sat down across from him. "So, what's the plan?" Daniel pulled out his laptop, opened the document he'd been building. "The FBI has the video. They'll investigate, but that takes time. Months, maybe years, before anyone goes to trial. I'm not waiting." "What are you thinking?" "Eleanor's power comes from control. She controls the family through fear and loyalty. She controls the legal system through connections. She controls the narrative by silencing anyone who speaks against her." Daniel looked up. So, we take away her control. All of it, systematically. How? We're going to do to her what she did to my son. We're going to break her one piece at a time. The next 96 hours moved like a chess game. Daniel stayed at the safe house with Grant, who was slowly starting to eat again, to talk in more than whispers. Lily arrived on the second day, brought by Daniel's lawyer, Thomas Reed, who'd secured temporary emergency custody. The order's good for 45 days, Thomas said. But they're going to fight it. Eleanor's already retained Bennett and Crowley. They're the best family law firm in the state. Let them fight, Daniel said. By the time we're done, she won't have the money to pay her lawyers. Thomas raised an eyebrow. What are you planning? Better if you don't know. Plausible deniability. While Daniel focused on his children, Cole and Mateo executed Phase 1. Cole's digital forensics had uncovered something beautiful, Eleanor's financial records. She'd been sloppy, confident no one would ever look. Over 28 years, she'd embezzled nearly $520,000 from the elementary school where she'd been principal. Small amounts buried in budget reports, explained away as supplies or program costs. Cole didn't just find the evidence. He packaged it beautifully, spreadsheets, bank records, receipts, and sent it anonymously to the Oregon Department of Education and the Portland District Attorney's Office. Mateo handled Aaron Whitmore personally. Aaron had been the most enthusiastic participant in Grant's torture, laughing the loudest on the video. Cole's research had found something useful. Aaron was working construction jobs under the table, dodging child support payments to 2 ex-wives. Mateo made sure the IRS got very detailed documentation of every job, every payment. Then he visited Aaron's current job site. Heard you like working with your hands, Mateo said, appearing behind Aaron during a lunch break. Breaking things, especially small things that can't fight back. Aaron turned, recognized Mateo from somewhere, but couldn't place him. Do I know you? No, but I know you. I know you held down a 10-year-old boy while your sister broke his fingers. Mateo smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. I also know you've been stealing tools from this site. Your foreman's going to find out tomorrow. And the day after that, the IRS is going to freeze your bank accounts. And the day after that, both your ex-wives are going to get your current address and proof of income. You can't. I already did. But here's the thing, Aaron. That's just the beginning. Every day, something else in your life is going to break. Your truck, the engine's going to seize. Your apartment, landlord's going to find out you've been subletting illegally. Your girlfriend, she's going to get an anonymous text with photos of you and that bartender from Alley's. Mateo leaned closer. I'm going to dismantle your entire life, piece by piece, until you have nothing left, just like you did to that little boy. Except you're an adult, so you'll understand every second of it. Aaron's face went pale. Who the hell are you? Someone who pays his debts. Julian Whitmore, the car dealership manager, required a different approach. He was the smartest of Eleanor's children, the most careful. Cole had found his dark corners, though, the customer complaints that had been buried, the financial irregularities, the sexual harassment allegations from 3 female employees that had been settled with NDAs and Eleanor's money. Daniel handled Julian himself. He walked into the dealership on a Tuesday afternoon, dressed in a suit, carrying a briefcase. Julian didn't recognize him at first. They'd only met at family gatherings, and Daniel had always been quiet, forgettable. Can I help you? Julian asked, his salesman smile automatic. I'm here about a purchase, Daniel said. A very specific one. They sat in Julian's office. Daniel opened his briefcase, pulled out a folder. I'm buying your silence. Julian's smile faltered. I'm sorry? 3 sexual harassment cases, all settled with company money that was actually embezzled from your mother's school accounts. The NDAs are void if the payments were obtained through illegal means. Daniel slid the folder across. The women are ready to talk. The DA is very interested. Julian's face went through several emotions before settling on calculation. What do you want? You're going to testify against your mother, against all of them. You're going to tell the FBI everything, every incident, every time she hurt a child, every time someone in the family crossed the line. You're going to give them 45 years of testimony. I'll be arrested too. Yes, but I've already talked to the DA. If you cooperate, you'll get immunity on everything except your own participation in what happened to Grant. That you'll serve time for, but it'll be 4 to 6 years instead of 25. Julian stared at the folder. Daniel could see the wheels turning, the same calculation he'd seen in dozens of criminals trying to decide whether to flip. And if I say no, then everything in that folder goes public tomorrow. The harassment victims, the embezzlement, the fact that you knew your mother was abusing children for decades and did nothing. You'll lose your job, your reputation, and you'll still go to prison for 25 years. Plus, I'll make sure everyone in there knows exactly what you did to a 10-year-old boy. The calculation finished. Julian reached for a pen. What do I need to sign by the end of the first week? The Whitmore family was fracturing. Eleanor's embezzlement had made the news. The school district was demanding a criminal investigation. Aaron had been fired and was facing IRS audits. Julian had disappeared. Daniel knew he was in protective custody, preparing his testimony, but the family didn't know that yet. The group chat that had once celebrated Grant's torture was now full of panicked messages. Daniel had Cole Bennett monitoring it, watching them turn on each other. Margaret was blaming Eleanor, Cole reported. She said she didn't know about the embezzlement. Savannah was saying she was just following family orders. They're eating their own. Good, Daniel said. Keep the pressure on. Victoria had tried to call 39 times. Daniel had blocked her number. His lawyer had been clear. No contact. The protective order was in place, but Daniel knew Eleanor would try something else. Desperate people made mistakes. The mistake came on day 11. Daniel was helping Grant with dinner when the doorbell rang. Mateo answered it, then called for Daniel. On the porch stood Vanessa Ramirez, one of the cousins who participated. She looked terrified. I need to talk to you, she said. Please, I'll tell you everything. Mateo stepped aside. Vanessa came in, hands shaking. Eleanor's planning something. She's not going down without a fight. She's been calling in favors, trying to make the embezzlement charges disappear, but it's not working. So she's going to take everyone down with her. What do you mean? Daniel asked. She's got dirt on everyone in the family. She's been collecting it for years. Insurance, she called it. If she goes down, she's going to destroy all of us. She's already threatened to release Victoria's psychiatric records from when she was 16. After the first time, Vanessa swallowed. After the first time, Eleanor made her hurt a kid. Victoria tried to kill herself. Eleanor covered it up, had her institutionalized privately. She's been holding it over Victoria ever since. Daniel felt something shift. He'd seen Victoria as a willing participant, a monster like her mother. But this added layers. Still guilty. She'd made her choices as an adult, but not simple. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because I want out. I want to testify. I want immunity, too, like Julian got. I'll tell you everything about Eleanor, about the other kids she hurt. About the foster children who disappeared. I was young, but I remember things. Things that can put her away forever. Daniel studied her. 17 years of evaluating criminals had taught him to spot deception. Vanessa was terrified. Yes, but she was telling the truth. Cole, Daniel called. Start recording. They talked for 3 hours. Vanessa detailed a system of abuse going back decades. Eleanor had fostered 10 children over 20 years. Most had been returned to the system, but 3 had disappeared from the records entirely. Vanessa didn't know what had happened to them, but she remembered their names. When she finished, Daniel made a call to Thomas Reed. I need you to contact the FBI. Tell them we have a witness ready to testify about multiple missing children. Daniel, what are you into? Thomas asked. Something that should have ended 45 years ago. Daniel replied. The walls closed in on Eleanor Whitmore. Over the next 2 weeks, the FBI opened a formal investigation. 2 of the missing foster children were found, adults now, living under different names, still traumatized. They confirmed everything Vanessa had said. The 3rd child was found in Eleanor's basement. They'd been doing renovations, the contractors said, cutting through old concrete to install new plumbing. They'd found human remains wrapped in plastic, buried under the foundation. Dental records confirmed it was Caleb Turner, a 7-year-old foster child who'd been placed with Eleanor in 1993. Official records said he'd been transferred to a different home. Reality was darker. The medical examiner determined he died from blunt force trauma, multiple fractures consistent with sustained abuse. He'd been dead before he went into the ground. Eleanor was arrested on a Tuesday morning, led out of her house in handcuffs while news cameras rolled. Her perfect facade cracked completely. She screamed at the officers, at the reporters, at the neighbors watching. She wasn't the refined former principal anymore. She was what she'd always been, a monster who'd hidden in plain sight. Margaret was arrested an hour later. Claire and Savannah turned themselves in that evening, hoping for plea deals. Victoria was taken into custody the next morning. Daniel watched it all on the news with Grant and Lily. His son's hands were healing. He'd started physical therapy. The nightmares were still bad, but Dr. Leonard Hayes had connected them with a trauma specialist who understood this kind of abuse. Is Mom going to prison? Lily asked. She was old enough to understand, but still heartbroken. Yes, Daniel said. There was no point in lying. Did you make that happen? Lily asked quietly. Daniel considered his answer carefully. I made sure the truth came out. What happens next is up to the justice system. It wasn't entirely true. Daniel had orchestrated every piece, pulled every string, but his children didn't need to know that. They needed to know they were safe. The trials took 10 months to begin. Daniel attended every preliminary hearing, every motion, every proceeding. He watched Eleanor's lawyers try every tactic, suppressing evidence, attacking witnesses, claiming their rights had been violated. Nothing worked. The evidence was overwhelming. Julian testified first, laying out decades of abuse in careful detail. Vanessa backed him up. The 3 surviving foster children told their stories. Medical experts testified about Caleb Turner's injuries. Digital forensics experts authenticated the video of Grant's torture. Eleanor's defense tried to paint her as a woman overwhelmed by the responsibility of raising so many children alone. Someone who'd made mistakes but hadn't meant harm. The jury didn't buy it. Neither did the judge. The verdict came down on a Friday. Guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree for Caleb Turner. 8 counts of first-degree assault on a child for Grant. Conspiracy. Witness tampering. Embezzlement. The sentences would run consecutively. Eleanor Whitmore would die in prison. Margaret got 28 years. Victoria got 18. Aaron got 14. Lucas, Claire, and Savannah got varying sentences between 10 and 18 years. The other family members who'd witnessed but not participated were charged with failure to report child abuse. Most took plea deals. Daniel sat in the courtroom when Eleanor's sentence was read. He'd expected to feel satisfaction, vindication. Instead, he felt tired. The system had worked. In the end, justice had been served, but his son still had nightmares. Lily still cried sometimes, grieving the mother she'd thought she had. The scars would last longer than any prison sentence. 18 months after the arrests, Daniel stood in the backyard of a new house in a different state, watching Grant play catch with Mateo. The physical therapy had worked. His son's hands moved normally again. The mental scars were deeper, but they were healing, too. Therapy helped. Time helped. Distance from Portland helped most of all. Lily was inside, video chatting with friends. She'd adapted better than Daniel expected, resilient in the way teenagers could be. She changed her last name legally, wanting no connection to the Whitmore family. Daniel had done the same. They were Harper now, just Harper. Dr. Leonard Hayes visited sometimes, checking on Grant's progress. He'd become something like a grandfather figure, filling the void left by Daniel's father and the loss of Victoria's family. Cole Bennett called monthly, making sure they were adjusting. He'd moved on to other cases, but he still kept tabs on the Whitmore family trials. There were more victims coming forward now, encouraged by the convictions, more investigations, the ripples spreading outward. Mateo stayed in touch, too. He found purpose in helping Daniel, in protecting a child who'd been hurt. He'd started working with an organization that helped abuse survivors, using his particular skills to track down abusers who'd escaped justice. Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from Thomas Reed. Final divorce decree came through. It's done. Daniel looked at the message for a long moment. Done. After 20 months, it was officially over. He was no longer married to Victoria. The legal ties were severed. He deleted the message and pocketed his phone. The past was the past. This Grant laughing as he caught a pop fly. Lily's voice drifting through the kitchen window, the sunshine on his face. This was what mattered now. That night, after the kids were in bed, Daniel sat on the porch with a beer. The stars were clearer here than they'd been in Portland. Everything was clearer. He thought about Eleanor Whitmore sometimes, sitting in her cell. He'd heard through legal channels that she tried to maintain control, even in prison, attempted to run her family from inside. It hadn't worked. The family had scattered, broken, reformed into smaller pieces without her toxicity binding them. He thought about Victoria, too. She'd written him once from prison, a long letter trying to explain, to apologize, to make him understand. He'd read it once and burned it. There was nothing she could say that would change what had happened. No explanation that would excuse it. The door opened. Grant stood there in his pajamas, holding his favorite stuffed animal. Can't sleep? Daniel asked. Grant shook his head. I had the dream again. Come here. His son climbed into his lap, still small enough to fit, growing so fast it scared Daniel sometimes. They sat together in the darkness, Daniel's arms around his boy. Dad? Grant asked after a while. Are we safe now? Yes, Daniel said. We're safe. Promise. Promise. It was a promise he intended to keep. He'd moved them across the country, changed their names, taken a new job at a university where nobody knew their history. He'd built them a new life far from the wreckage of the old one. But he'd also kept certain insurance policies. Cole still monitored the Whitmore family members who'd been released or given lighter sentences. Mateo had made it clear to all of them what would happen if they came anywhere near Daniel's children. And Daniel himself maintained a file, everything he'd learned, all the evidence, every detail of the investigation, ready to be released if anyone tried to hurt his family again. He'd learned from Eleanor. In a way, she'd controlled through fear and secrets. Daniel controlled through preparation and consequences. If anyone came for his children again, they'd find out just how far he was willing to go, but hopefully, it wouldn't come to that. Hopefully, the Whitmore family had learned their lesson. Hopefully, they'd stay in their cells, and their parole hearings, and their supervised visits, far away from the new life Daniel had built. Tell me a story, Grant said, his voice sleepy now. Daniel smiled. What kind of story? A happy one. Okay. Once upon a time, there was a boy who was very brave, braver than he knew. And even when bad things happened to him, he survived. He healed, he grew up to be strong and kind and good, and he had a little boy of his own someday. And he made sure that boy never had to be as brave as he'd been, because the world was safer now, better. Is that a true story? Grant asked. Daniel looked at his son, at the healing scars on his hands, at the trust still there in his eyes despite everything. It's going to be, he said, I promise you it's going to be. And as he carried Grant back to bed, tucking him in and watching him fall asleep, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The past 20 months have been darkness, discovery, rage, revenge, justice, but they'd come through it, broken, maybe changed, certainly, but alive, together, safe. The next morning would bring new challenges. Lily had a therapy appointment. Grant had physical therapy. Daniel had work. The normal, mundane challenges of rebuilding a life. But for now, in this moment, watching his children sleep peacefully in a home where no one would hurt them, Daniel allowed himself to believe what he told Grant. They were going to be okay. It wasn't the ending he'd imagined when he'd stood in the rain at his father's funeral, watching that video, feeling his world shatter. It wasn't neat or simple or complete. The Whitmore family's victims would carry scars forever. Justice had been served, but it didn't undo the damage. But it was an ending nonetheless, the kind where the good guys won, where the monsters faced consequences, where a father protected his children and gave them a chance at a future. Daniel Harper had done what he'd set out to do. He'd torn down Eleanor Whitmore's empire of abuse. He'd made sure his son's torturers faced justice. He'd built a new life from the ashes of the old one. And if sometimes he still woke up in the night thinking about what could have happened if Madison Clark hadn't found that video, if he'd been even a day later, if Eleanor had been smarter about covering her tracks, well, that was the price of knowledge. Of understanding how close they'd come to disaster. But they hadn't fallen into that disaster. They'd survived it. And that, Daniel thought as he finally headed to bed himself, was victory enough. The lights went out in the house. Outside, the stars kept shining. Inside, a broken family learned to be whole again. And somewhere in a prison cell hundreds of miles away, Eleanor Whitmore learned what it meant to lose control forever. The end came not with violence or dramatic confrontation, but with something simpler, a father, his children, and the quiet promise of safety. Sometimes Daniel had learned that was the most powerful revenge of all, not destroying your enemy, but building something better in the space they tried to corrupt. And as he drifted off to sleep, Daniel Harper smiled. Because tomorrow he'd wake up and be exactly what he'd always wanted to be, a good father, a protector, a man his children could trust. Eleanor Whitmore had tried to break his family. Instead, she'd broken herself against their strength, and that, in the end, was justice served. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you. My mom accused me of hitting my brother, but 2 years later, his stealing finally exposed his lies, and my dad confessed he knew I was innocent. And my mother's collapse made news. Hello Reddit. My family spent years referring to me as the issue. They lied, twisted everything, and eventually sent me away to mend myself. I remained silent, made my own life, and believed I was free until their entire charade fell apart. But first, here's how it all started. My name is Daniel, and I'm 18. I reside in a house that appears perfect if you drive past too quickly. My mother, Laura, refers to it as her safe space. The lawns are always trimmed straight. Curtains always match. Even the mailbox is cleaned down. Inside, however, everything seems as if it may erupt at the slightest thing. David, the father, travels most weeks. When he gets home, he camps out in his office, pretending to work. He's adept at nodding without listening. Mom calls him the stable one, but that's only because he never chooses sides. Then there's my 15-year-old brother, Matthew, with the baby face, phony innocence, and full-time tattletale. He quickly realized that pretending terrified of me kept him out of trouble. I might breathe too loudly, and he'd think I was angry again. A mother would chastise me before asking what had occurred. Every morning, Mom begins with her checklist voice. Shoes at the door, dishes away, and no crumbs on the counter. She is not nasty at first, but rather accurate. However, if you deviate from the script, the tone quickly shifts. She has a blackboard in the kitchen with home rules. That's what she considers rules. Each one has a check mark next to it if you performed well that day. She claims it teaches accountability. I say nothing since responding just results in a red X beside my name. We attend church every Sunday. Matthew portrays an angel. People adore him there. Mom brightens when someone comments, "You've raised such polite boys." She doesn't look at me. There is no school break. Teachers describe me as having an attitude issue. Apparently asking why a rule exists is rude. So I stay silent. I earn respectable marks, but not fantastic ones. Since I'm weary of hearing my mother say you could do better if you concentrated like your brother. Mrs. Foster, our next-door neighbor, does not help. She's the type that watered her plants only to spy. She informs Mom that she is concerned about me. Says I appear furious as I go home from school. Mom swallows it up. After one of those discussions, I returned home to find my door open and my belongings moved. She stated that she was looking for smokes. I do not even smoke. That night, I began keeping my phone in a shoebox beneath my bed. She had already gone through everything once, claiming she wanted to make sure you weren't exposed to the wrong influences. The residence is under monitoring. There are cameras in the living room for insurance, and Mom changes the door codes on a monthly basis. She describes it as responsible parenting. I call it paranoia. I retain my sanity by repairing my old bicycle. Tightening bolts and hearing the click of gears makes sense. Machines do not lie about what is wrong with them. Matthew enjoys watching me from the porch. He will smile as if we are good brothers. Then he'll go inside before I can respond, saying something like, "Mom said you're not supposed to use the tools without asking." 10 minutes later, Mom knocks on the door. "What did I tell you about respecting house property?" When Dad went for another trip later that week, Matthew began gloating about his new freedoms. Mom let him use the home tablet and told him he could assist track tasks. Basically, he was elevated to spy. I attempted to talk to Mom about it once. I responded, "I feel like you believe him no matter what he says." She said, "Then maybe stop giving him reasons to worry." That ended the conversation. By Friday, the air within the home seemed thick. Even the lights appeared too bright. Matthew was testing me by breaking small things. A picture frame, a phone charger, and a whisper, "Mom's going to blame you." He wasn't mistaken. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I went into the corridor to get water. I heard my folks' door break open. Mom's voice was harsh, low. "He is going to destroy all we have created." Dad's reply was muted. "He's only a kid." "No," she said. "He's a problem." I waited motionless until the floor cracked. The voices ceased. I returned to my room and laid there, looking at the ceiling fan. It hummed weakly and off balance. I considered how even something correctly placed may shake free if spun for too long. That's what the home felt like. Everything spun, appearing to be under control. The week started off stressful. Nobody said it aloud, but the house seemed to be waiting for someone to make a mistake. Mom was walking faster than normal, her lips tight, her gaze darting around as if hunting for something out of place. Dad stayed late at work every night, alleging more meetings. Matthew was smiling too much. He pretended to be calm before pulling something. Mom was at her office on Wednesday afternoon, wrapping off a presentation for work. Matthew hovered behind her, appearing to help. 10 minutes later, I heard her scream. A stomach-dropping shriek. I rushed in and found her clutching her laptop, her eyes crazy. "It's gone. The file's gone," she exclaimed. Matthew moved back, hands up. "Daniel used the computer earlier," he said immediately. That wasn't true. I hadn't touched it, but she spun toward me before I could speak. "You did this, didn't you? You can't stand to see anyone else succeed," I added, "without even opening your laptop. You think this is funny? I have a deadline." Dad walked in halfway through and just sighed. "Can we not?" he said. Mom ignored him and yelled, "You're sabotaging me." I stood there, hands open. "Check the history," I said. "You'll see." I wasn't even logged in, and she didn't check anything. She slammed the laptop shut and stormed off. Later, I heard her tell Dad that autosave brought it back. The trash showed that it was renamed and deleted while Matthew was helping. Dinner that night was a minefield. Matthew kept poking at me under the table, whispering, "Maybe don't touch Mom's stuff next time." I told him to stop. Mom looked up from her plate. "Do not start." I wasn't starting. I scarcely said anything. She nitpicked everything I did, how I chewed, how I breathed, how I looked. Dad stared at his meal as if he wanted to disappear. When Mom's phone rang, she read something, frowned and muttered, "Unbelievable." She dropped the phone hard. "Your teacher emailed me," she stated. "Apparently you're being disrespectful again." "Non-operative, is that true?" I said. I didn't say anything nasty, I simply inquired. She cut me off. "You just can't stop talking back, can you?" Dad scratched his brow. "Daniel, you need to quit making everything harder than it is. Just do as you are taught." I said, I'm not doing anything wrong. He snapped, then get serious or get out. I felt air escape my chest, and Matthew sat back in his chair, as if he were watching a performance. Mom responded, that is enough. Head to your room. I'm finished. I rose up but remained there, attempting to find the proper words. You don't even listen anymore. She stated, because I'm tired of the lies. Matthew had his phone half hidden, filming, and I noticed the reflection in the glass cabinet. He wanted confirmation that I had lost it. I took a step closer to the counter and slammed my fist on it, the sound echoing. Nobody listens, I shouted, my voice cracking halfway through. I wasn't shouting threats, I was just exhausted. Matthew sprang up and rushed for the stairs, yelling, he hit me. Mom gasped and raced after him, and I followed a few seconds later. She was in his room, holding him as he pretended to weep, and his gaming monitor was on the floor, shattered in the center. He had one hand on his shoulder, red from rubbing it hard. He grabbed me and threw it, Matthew replied through phony sobbing. Mom looked at me as if I had grabbed a knife. You did this? She asked. I answered, no, I didn't touch him. She did not blink. You stay right there, she whispered, her voice low and stern. Don't move. Dad ran up, glanced at the monitor, and then at me. What the hell happened? I said, ask him. He had broken it previously. Matthew said, he's lying. He panicked out, and Mom didn't ask for any further information, instead pulling out her phone and saying she was contacting the cops for his protection. I said, are you serious? When the authorities arrived, everything slowed down. They questioned inquiries, checked around, and found no significant injuries. Matthew sniffled in his mother's arms, while I stood by the wall, motionless. One of the officers asked if I wanted to go somewhere else for the night. I replied no, and he nodded, telling Mom there wasn't much they could do. When they went, the stillness was worse than the yelling. Mom murmured, you require assistance. This cannot go on, I said, I didn't hurt him. She responded, that's exactly what someone in denial says. Dad began packing a little suitcase with my clothing. When I inquired where I was going, he said, just do what your mother says. It is for the best. I stopped arguing. The next morning, Mom was already dressed, vehicle keys in hand, and said, we're bringing you to a nice program. They support families like ours. She made it seem like a vacation, and Dad carried the bag. Matthew sat at the bottom of the stairs, eating cereal with the same tiny smirk he usually had when things went well. I went out without looking at him. In the van, Mom talked about healing and beginning anew in a calm, even pleased tone, as if she had solved a major problem. I gazed out the window and the home slid by. Perfect lawns, spotless driveways, and families who likely assumed we were normal. I remained silent during the journey, thinking, this isn't helping. It's time to tidy up. They didn't save me. They were getting rid of me. Ridgeway Youth Recovery Center was where they took me, and the sign out front had a tree emblem and the statement, Rebuilding Futures. It appeared like a school from the outside, with brick buildings, groomed grass, and large windows, but as the doors closed behind me, it sounded like a lock clicking. A staff member with a synthetic grin grabbed my luggage and murmured, welcome to Ridgeway, as if she were reading a sentence from a brochure. Her name tag was Angela. I had to empty my pockets, hand up my phone, belt, shoelaces, and even my earbuds. They gave me a transparent plastic bag with a toothbrush, 2 shirts with Ridgeway emblazoned on the back, and plain gray sweatpants, all with a number tag. Mine was 52C. Then came the metal detector and a list of contraband. Intake took approximately an hour, with forms, signatures, and a board nurse reading the script. The personnel was courteous, but had that artificial tone they use when they already know you don't belong. They pushed me through like a fast track they had raced 100 times. The corridor smelled of chlorine and cafeteria food, and my room had 2 metal bunk beds, a little window that was too high to reach, and a damaged dresser. My bunkmates arrived later. Jacob, 19, is tall and has a caustic smile, whereas Carlos, 17, is quiet, short in stature, and has black bags under his eyes. Jacob put his stuff on the bed and said, "Are you the new kid? Welcome to Ridgeway High School for the morally confused." When I inquired how long he'd been here, he smiled and said, "Too long to still care." Carlos rarely glanced up, writing something in a notebook every night, I later learned. He sent messages to his younger sister, claiming she was the only one who still thought he'd return home soon. The first night, the lights went off at 9 p.m. A guard made rounds every hour, flashlight beams swept the walls, and you couldn't completely seal the door. At 6 a.m., a bell rang. Breakfast consisted of powdered eggs, bread and plastic-tasting milk, and group therapy took place in a circle of plastic chairs beneath a banner that said, "Own your harm." Miss Denning, the psychotherapist, spoke like a podcast presenter, saying that accountability is healing. When it was my chance to explain what I had done wrong, I said, "I did not damage anyone." My brother lied. She smiled too wide. Denial is usual at this point. You'll get there. I answered, "There's nothing to go to." She wrote something on her clipboard. Resistance requires organized empathy. After that, I stopped sharing. Jacob told me later. If you don't say sorry, they keep you longer. He'd learned to fake it. You just tell them you understand your triggers and weep a bit, he said. Then they pronounce you healed. Carlos muttered, "It doesn't matter." Breakfast, chores, therapy, anger cycle worksheets, lights out. The same routine every day. I started working out in the mornings, doing push-ups, sit-ups, and laps in the corridor, to help me keep quiet. We weren't supposed to write anything that wasn't program authorized, but I kept a little notebook beneath my mattress and scribbled brief lines of facts, not diary entries. On day 9, the counselor stated that lying is a defensive strategy, and I also mentioned silence. Day 14 marked the first time Jacob laughed during breakfast. Day 20. Carlos claimed he thinks of home every night, but I don't. Mom came to visit 2 months later, and the staff had made the room appear pleasant with plants, sweets, and phony warmth. She hugged me like she was posing for a photo. "You look calmer," she said. I said, "I was calm before." She smiled tight. "See, that's the attitude we're fixing." She talked to the counselor afterward, praising Ridgway for turning him around. I heard her laugh down the hallway, and I didn't feel angry, just empty. I didn't see her again. Jacob made things palatable by joking about the group leaders, calling them the emotion police. But at night, when the lights went down, he spoke quieter. "You know why you're here? Not because of what you did," he stated once. "They needed to feel they had handled it. It's simpler to claim my son is getting treatment than to admit we screwed him over." Carlos nodded from the other bunk. "Better a rehab kid than a broken family." I didn't respond, but I did write it down later. After 6 months they declared I was ready for release. I hadn't acknowledged any wrongdoing, but I'd been silent, obeyed the rules, and didn't argue. They said I'd made substantial progress. At Ridgway they checked boxes and beat confessions. Compliance appeared to be healing on paper. The night before I left, Jacob walked with me to the gate after the lights were out, and the sky beyond the barred window seemed big and empty. He told me, "When you get out, don't anticipate a new family waiting for you. Expect the same one, just quieter." I answered, "I know." In the morning they returned my phone with a dead battery and no messages, and a staff member handed me a paper called Home Transition Plan. It said things like, "Be honest about your progress," and "Practice patience with family reintegration." Dad was waiting in the car outside and he didn't get out, just nodded when I opened the door. The drive home was silent except for the GPS voice. Dad cleared his throat once and said, "Your mom's been worried sick." I looked out the window. When we pulled into the driveway, Mom's flowers were still perfectly lined up against the clean bricks, as if nothing had changed. I thought about Jacob's comment about how people prefer a neat story to the messy truth, and I wondered how you communicate with people who have already decided who you are. When I walked back into the house, the first thing I noticed was the smell. The same candles, the same floor polish, the same phony sense of calm. Mom, Laura, was in the kitchen, smiling as if everything was fine. A tray of cookies sat on the counter, just like when guests came over. She said, "Welcome home," as if she were greeting a neighbor. Matthew came down the stairs, grinning wide. "Hey big bro," he said. His hair was styled, his clothes were new, and there was a new gaming setup in the living room, a big monitor, LED lights, and a brand new chair. Dad stood in the corner with his phone half in his hand, giving me a quick pat on the shoulder. "We all make mistakes," he continued, like he was reading a phrase from someplace. My old room was gone. They'd transformed it into a guest room, with fresh paint, attractive furnishings, and no sign of me. My belongings were placed into boxes in the garage labeled Daniel's Old Things. That night we had supper as if it were a holiday, and Mom asked superficial questions. Do they feed you properly there? Have you learned anything useful? The next morning I saw a letter attached on the fridge, House Guidelines for Reintegration, with bullet points like, respect space, communicate calmly, and demonstrate trustworthiness. I replied sure, just to make it short. Matthew kept gazing at me between meals, as if he was waiting for me to slip. It was not signed, but the handwriting was Mom's. The first day of school, people stared at me like I was a new exhibit. Whispers followed me from the lockers to class, and someone whispered, "That's the kid who hit his brother." I stopped pretending I didn't hear it. One of the teachers, Mr. Collins, approached me after class. "I hope you're doing better now," he remarked slowly and cautiously, as if speaking to a recovered junkie. I answered, "Yeah, that was it." By the end of the week I heard Matthew telling others he'd forgiven me, and a student said, "That's really mature of your brother." I laughed loudly once and then stopped. At home, Mom treated me like a probationary visitor, saying things like, "It's nice to see you trying." Or, "I hope this calm version of you lasts." If I failed to close a cabinet or leave a lamp on, she'd pause, breathe through her nose and add, "Let's not slip back into old habits." After 2 weeks I found a part-time job at a local auto shop. Dad avoided any real talk, just saying, "We're proud of you," without looking up from his phone. Matthew liked to test me by borrowing my headphones and forgetting to return them. Once, I caught him in the garage digging through my boxes. "Just looking for my old stuff," he said, smirking and leaving a comic book half torn on the floor. I didn't react because I knew he wanted me to. Rick, the proprietor, was in his 40s, bald, heavy-handed and didn't mince words. He remarked, "You work, you get paid. Don't fool around." That was great with me. The room smelled like oil and metal, and the cacophony of tools was incessant, but reassuring. Machines didn't ask questions. Rick showed me how to replace brakes and interpret engine noises, and he wasn't interested in my narrative. When I inquired if he required my ID for the paperwork, he said, "Just show up on time. That's enough ID." I felt normal for the first time in months, and I enjoyed how Greece didn't disguise its true nature. Back home, nothing had changed. Mom still avoided eye contact, and Matthew continued finding new ways to poke. He'd walk into my room, or the guest room, and say, "Don't mind if I use your old charger, right?" I'd answer, "Yeah, I mind," and he'd grin. Dinner talks were brief. Mom inquired about work, Dad commented on the weather, Matthew boasted about academics, friends, everything. He was the ideal child again. One night, I arrived home late after a job. They were in the living room, watching TV, when Matthew silenced it and remarked, "Working hard? That place must be teaching you discipline." Mom smiled faintly. "See, positive structure works." I went upstairs without answering. The next day I came home early and heard Matthew talking on his phone in his room. His voice carried down the hall. "He's calm now because they fixed him," he said, laughing. "Yeah, it worked. He barely speaks. He's like a robot now." I stood by the door until I heard him say, "Mom told me she was happy of how I handled things." Matthew answered, "Yeah, I know. I guess I'm the reason things are better." His pal chuckled. "I'm basically the reason our family is fine." I rushed out the front door before I could say anything further. The air outside was cold enough to sting. I sat on the curb across the street. The neighborhood was quiet. Sprinklers running, porch lights glowing. Perfect little lives. I thought about how Mom said they'd fixed me, which meant I'd stopped fighting back. Silence was what they wanted, and I'd finally given it to them. I didn't move when a car passed by, headlights sweeping across my face, and I stayed until the street went dark again. The next morning, I opened a teen account at the credit union near the shop with my state ID, deposited my first paycheck, and didn't tell anyone. I had no idea what I was saving for, maybe a car, maybe a room far away. But it felt good to have something that was mine again, something that no one could take or twist into their story. I kept the receipts folded in my wallet. Each one felt like a small piece of freedom. Matthew had gotten cocky since I returned. At first it was small things, like taking my stuff, lying about it, and laughing when I caught him. But it quickly escalated. When I started seeing money missing from Mom's handbag and little items vanishing from drawers, she didn't even question him. She asked me. "I know you've been trying," she said one night, her voice placid but cutting at the edges. But old habits don't vanish overnight. I said, "Do you believe I took $20? She exhaled. I didn't say that. Matthew walked by, eating chips and pretending not to listen. I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. The next morning, she discovered her watch missing, and she accused me again. That evening, Matthew posted a story online saying, "When toxic people play the victim, it's just sad." He tagged a quote about recovery not being real for everyone. A couple students from school reshared it, and I didn't answer because I didn't need to. People believe whatever they want, and he enjoyed the silence. He'd hover by me at breakfast and say, "Are you going to shout this time, or are you going to do that silent furious thing?" Rick kept me busy at work, so I didn't respond. Instead, I got my bag and went to the shop. Rick didn't say much, but when he did, it stuck. "Family can make you crazy," he said one afternoon while tightening a bolt. "They build a picture in their heads, and then they get mad when you don't fit in it." I said, "They think they fixed me," and Rick snorted. "People prefer having control. You stopped giving them the response they desired. That's what's really driving them crazy." At home, things were unraveling. One of Matthew's instructors phoned his mother after he was discovered plagiarizing an essay. She explained that he was stressed out by family difficulties. When I arrived in that night, she was weeping in the kitchen. Matthew had gone missing with her bank card for a few hours, and when he returned, he claimed he wanted space and slammed his door. She looked at me as if it was my fault. "Can't you try to be supportive? He's still recovering from what happened to you." I responded, "He isn't mending. He's manipulating you." Her eyes became steely. "Don't project your issues onto him." I stopped trying to explain since silence was easier, and it troubled her more anyhow. 2 days later, everything blew out. I was beneath a car at the shop when I heard yelling out front, and Rick screamed my name. "You better come out here." Mom stood behind the counter, red-faced, clutching her handbag as if she were about to swing it. "You need to stop enabling my son," she said. "Rick. He's supposed to be in recovery, not hiding in garages." Rick cleaned his hands calmly as usual. "He's working, ma'am. Harder than most adults I know." She pointed at me and said, "You do not understand. He has aggressive inclinations. He need monitoring. He's manipulating you." Rick went forward, his voice low but firm. "Lady, the only one yelling here is you. My shop is for business, not whatever this is." She scowled, shivering. "You'll regret defending him." Rick motioned toward the door. "Then you can take that energy somewhere. Out." She hesitated for a second, as if she couldn't believe someone was talking back to her, then turned and walked away. I didn't say anything. When I arrived home that night, she was waiting for me, the lights out except for the one above the dining table, and she stood with her arms crossed. "How dare you humiliate me like that," she muttered. "Marching in there yelling at my boss was your idea." "I didn't do anything," I said. "You made me look insane in front of a stranger." I responded. "You didn't need my help for that." Her voice erupted into a shout. "You think you're better than this family now? Do you think you can walk around claiming you're okay while the rest of us suffer?" Matthew walked downstairs, pretending to mediate. "Mom, calm down. He is doing that thing again. You're scaring her, Daniel." I turned to face him. "You started this." Mom stood between us. "Don't raise your voice." I did not. "See," Matthew observed. "He's doing it again." Something in her broke, and she smacked me, the sound hitting more than the hurt. She paused, hand shaking while Matthew smiled behind her. I stood up, my voice cold. "You need help more than I ever did." Dad arrived from the hallway, half awake and half useless. He looked between us, said nothing, and walked into the kitchen. The stillness that followed was worse than yelling. I walked upstairs and packed my suitcase with only my clothing, wallet, and a few tools from the store. I put a letter on the back of an envelope. "I'm not angry, just done." When I returned, she was seated at the table, sobbing silently, while Matthew leaned against the wall, arms crossed, still playing the innocent. I didn't say anything and went out the door. Outside, the night was chilly and peaceful, and the streetlights buzzed. As I passed the next home, Mrs. Foster was watering her plants on her porch despite the fact that it was dark, and she spotted me with the bag and said, "Good riddance." I paused for a while and stared at her. "Yeah," I responded, partly smiling. "You'll see." Then I kept walking. The room above Rick's garage wasn't much, but it was mine. It smelled of oil and metal, and the floor moaned with the wind. Rick cleared it with the landlord as long as the rent showed up and the fire extinguisher tags were current, and no one asked about my age. I worked long hours at the shop, and Rick paid me cash at first before putting me on the books. He handed me the key to the garage and added, "Lock up when you're done. Don't burn down the place." That was his definition of trust. Nights were peaceful, and I'd sit by the window scribbling on my laptop. At first it was simply notes, recollections from Ridgeway, phony grins and rehearsed therapy lines. Then I started posting them online under an anonymous account called The Ones They Fixed, with the first post reading, "I was sent away for something I didn't do." They stated that it was recovery. It was punishment. People began to remark. Some stated they had also been there. One noted the same counselor, another posted images of the dorms, and within a week, I had received dozens of comments. Kids, parents, and even a journalist asked for specifics, but I didn't reveal my name or location. I simply continued blogging. Someone ultimately dropped a link to a 2-year-old story about Ridgeway youth recovery being investigated for unethical activities, which identified the same counselors and approaches. It stated that the establishment was owned by a firm that relaunched every few years under new names. Rick saw me still typing one evening when he came up to check the thermostat. "Are you doing schoolwork or starting a war?" he asked. "Just writing." He nodded and looked around. "Good. Just be sure you create something out of it. Do not let it eat you." A few weeks later, one of my messages was shared on a large forum, and the comments exploded. Other families began to recognize the name Ridgeway, and the local news took it up. It was a little story, but it stirred things up. They dubbed it rehab or rebranding, the secret business of behavioral treatments. I didn't say anything publicly since the narrative spoke for itself. Then my phone rang in the afternoon. Mom's voice shook as I said, "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You are ruining this family." I said, "You mean telling the truth? You are making us appear insane. Your sibling is suffering as a result of this. You are dragging his name into the muck." I said, "He dragged mine first." She began to cry, then became angry. "You've always craved attention. Now you have it." I hung up. After that, time flew by. I turned 18, got my license, and Rick handed me the keys to an old truck. "It's yours if you can fix it," he said. It took me 2 weeks to get it operating. It wasn't nice, but it worked every time. That was more than I could say for most things in my life. My work remained consistent, and the account continued to expand. I never posted names, but people linked the links on their own. Some nights, I'd check the comments and see strangers defending kids like me, which seemed novel to me. Then the phone call began, this time from Mom. "Your brother has been suspended," she added, as if it were my fault. "He was caught stealing money from classmates. He claims it's because you filled his brain with resentment." I responded, "He's just getting caught for what he's always done." She responded, "Don't talk about him like that. He is still your brother." "I know," I answered. "That's the problem." A week later, Dad phoned, his voice subdued and exhausted. "We need to talk," he said. I met him midway outside a diner parking lot. He didn't get out of the car, only rolled the window down halfway. "I witnessed Matthew destroy that monitor," he added. "That night, everything fell down. He was afraid. And I didn't say anything, thinking it had maintained the peace." I leaned against the window frame. "You let them send me away to keep the peace." He looked down at the driving wheel and said, "I'm sorry." I took out my phone and began recording. "Say it again." He paused. "Daniel, say it. I'm sorry." I stopped filming, stated, "I don't need your guilt," and walked away. I never shared it. The next month, Matthew was caught stealing from a convenience store, with security footage and police present. Mom came up at the station yelling that he was a wonderful guy, and it was all a misunderstanding. It made the local paper, a small paragraph in the back. Rick delivered it to me at work, grinning. "Guess karma's got better timing than most people." I didn't grin, but I sensed something near. Later that night, I sat on the truck bed outside the garage, and the air smelled like oil and rain. I unlocked my phone, browsed through the news comments, and saw Ridgeway mentioned again, this time in relation to families like mine. Between the loudness and the stillness, I realized I wasn't furious anymore. I was just done. For the first time, the reality was louder than their story, and that felt like enough. It had been months since I had heard from any of them. The last thing Mom said was that I had destroyed the family, and then there was nothing. I continued to work, fix vehicles, save money, and avoid thinking about them. Then, one night at closing time, I heard a tap on the garage door and opened it to find Matthew, who appeared to be in shambles. The sweatshirt he used to brag about was now tattered and soiled, and his eyes were red, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Mom kicked me out," he continued, his tone dull. I leaned on the counter. "Why?" "She's lost it." I said I humiliated her. "Said I turned out just like you." He uttered a dry laugh that evolved into a cough. "Guess she finally ran out of people to blame." I brought him a bottle of water and a towel, and he sat on a stool, shivering. After a minute, he murmured, "I lied, Daniel. That night, I made everything up. I did not say anything. I wanted her to look at me. That is all. The bruising was not even caused by you. I had fallen off my bike earlier that week. I knew she would believe it." He rubbed his hands on his face. "I didn't think they'd actually send you away." "You did?" I spoke quietly. He started weeping, and I didn't know how to stop it. Every time she mentioned you, she looked at me as if I had saved her, which I enjoyed. I simply continued walking, and I didn't feel angry, just distant. I offered him another bottle of water and said, "Tell her not to contact me." He glanced up in confusion. "She will not listen. That is your issue today." He departed a few minutes later, wiping his face, and I saw him go down the street, shoulders slumped as if the air was too thick. I walked back inside, shut the door, and continued working with the wrench in my hand, which felt substantial, familiar, and genuine. After a few weeks, a letter arrived in the mail, written in Dad's handwriting. I opened it halfway and stopped, skimming the first line and not bothering to continue. It said, "Laura is having a breakdown. Matthew is in treatment. I am leaving town. I apologize for what we did to you." I folded it once, placed it in a drawer, and never opened it again. 2 years later, I was 20 and running my own corner of the shop. Rick had semi-retired and let me handle the majority of the day-to-day work. He put me on the books and let me invoice my bays under my own DBA, Daniel Reed Auto Repair. Business was steady, and I had a small apartment above a bakery across town, plain but quiet. I worked 6 days a week, fixed what was broken, and didn't look back. Rick would stop by every now and then, drop a coffee on the counter and say, "You're doing fine, kid." That was his version of proud. A customer mentioned a woman named Laura who had started showing up at church, ranting about betrayal. Mrs. Foster occasionally brings her Corolla in. According to one source, Matthew was living with relatives upstate, in and out of therapy, and trying to figure out who he was. Apparently, his mother attempted to sue the school district for tarnishing Matthew's reputation after his shoplifting arrest, but it failed because she had burned too many bridges. She once told Rick, "That poor woman finally lost her mind." I didn't laugh. It felt like the story was ending without me in it. One morning I walked into the shop early. Sunlight hit the metal racks, making the wrenches gleam. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was an unknown number, and the message read, "I told her everything. I am sorry." I didn't need to inquire who it was. Matthew. I gazed at the screen for a long, typed a few lines, deleted them, and placed the phone down. I wasn't furious or satisfied, just silent. Outside, the morning was chilly, and the street was empty except for the sound of a delivery truck down the block. I stepped out to the parking lot, leaned on the hood of an old pickup I'd been working on, and pulled the wrench from my back pocket, the same one Rick gave me years ago when I first started. The metal was worn smooth from use, and it caught the sunlight and threw a sharp line across the ground. For a moment, I reflected on how everything I'd fixed over the years had one thing in common. I looked back at the shop, the open bay door, the noise of a new day beginning, and realized that nothing ever goes back to the way it was before. You could repair it and make it work again, but the break was still there, even if no one could see it. Some things can't be fixed, so you just learn to live without them. My ex threatened to hurt me if I dated anyone after him, and followed me to a Halloween party. That night, I watched him hug my new boyfriend. On my way to see my lover at a skyscraper rooftop Halloween party, the elevator door opened and I spotted a monster. Lucas, my ex who injured me so badly I required a blood transfusion. Behind my masquerade mask and thick makeup, I was frozen. As he entered the elevator without looking at me, his ornate outfit felt like armor and a trap. Lucas clicked the roof button and leaned against the wall, browsing through his phone, oblivious that the plague doctor in the corner was me. The historical outfit comprised gloves, a long cloak, and boots that modified my height. The mask covered everything save my eyes. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. I felt safer in the elevator with 3 others. A zombie couple was making out in the corner as we walked from the parking garage basement to the lobby. Lucas and I were separated by a Superman costumed man texting, but I knew that would change as others got off at different floors. More people came on the elevator at the lobby, forcing me into the corner, and Lucas had to move backward to get closer. I smelled his scent from the night he threw me down the stairs for smiling at a male barista. If I wasn't afraid to vomit, his Ryan Blake costume from American Psycho might have been humorous. "Cool costume," he observed casually as we passed the 6th level. Despite the disguise, I nodded, not trusting my voice. Zombies left on floor 6. Superman left on floor 10. Lucas, myself, and an elderly witch-dressed woman were alone on floor 14. Jack waited on the roof, perhaps checking his phone and wondering where I was. Our first public event was weeks in the making. Finally ready to reveal our connection. All I could think of was what Lucas said last time we saw him. "If I see you with another man, I'll kill him first so you can watch." The witch left on floor 17. 20 levels later, Lucas and I were alone. My legs were trembling so much I had to lock my knees to stand. "Great party tonight," Lucas commented, skimming his phone. "Should be wild." I nodded again as the floor numbers rose. 19, 20. Under all the layers my outfit was saturated in sweat, and my makeup ran under the mask. Floor 24, 25, and Lucas adjusted his weight, getting closer to me without noticing. I pressed tighter against the wall, recalling how he would fill up space until I had nowhere to go. Each floor made the elevator feel smaller. I remembered Jack's expression when he asked me why I kept my history private, didn't use social media, and always looked over my shoulder while we were out. I promised to explain later, but not tonight. Not like this. Not with Lucas present to witness us. Floor 30. A text buzzed my phone. I recognized Jack without looking, probably wondering whether I was close. If I was okay, Lucas looked at the sound, then returned to his phone. No way I'd grab mine. Was afraid to move. Lucas commented, "You know, you're really committed to staying in character," as we reached floor 32. Shaking my suit, I responded, "Haven't said a word this whole ride." He laughed. That chuckle made me cringe. Usually preceded unpleasant things. I was thinking about what might happen when the elevator doors opened on floors 34 and 35. Lucas saw everything as Jack called out and hugged me. The last male who showed interest in me when I was with Lucas was a nice server who brought me additional bread since I enjoyed their focaccia. Lucas waited until we got home, then held my hand over the stove heat until I swore off flirting. The waiter was dismissed the next week after Lucas called. Floor 37. My whole body shook as I approached. Jack was unaware of Lucas's abilities. Without knowing that he would meet a charming person at this party, I triple-checked every lock and slept with a dagger under my pillow. We reached the roof. I rushed out of the elevator to locate Jack. Lucas left before me. He waved and hugged a bro after exiting the elevator. I stopped in my tracks when I saw who he hugged after exiting the elevator. It was Jack. Jack pointed right at me as the elevator doors closed. Lucas turned, looked at me, and smiled slowly. Requested Reds is on Spotify. See link in description or comments. Jack lighted up as he spotted me and started heading toward me with Lucas beside him, one arm already extending out to bring me into the group. Jack opened his lips to say something, and my body stiffened because in 2 seconds, he would introduce me and Lucas would hear my name, see Jack's arm around me, and know everything. Lucas smiled wider as he examined my costume, moving from the mask to the cloak and back. He was attempting to figure something out. His expression was like when he searched my phone for proof I was cheating, even though I wasn't. Jack grabbed my hand and pulled me forward. He started talking about the plague doctor he'd been warning everyone about. My thoughts begged me to run, but my legs wouldn't. I saw this nightmare unfold in slow motion while party music played and others joked like nothing was wrong. Lucas approached and I smelled his perfume and saw his jaw set. That face he gets before deciding to discipline someone. My fingers pushed through Jack's shirt as I yanked him backward with all my effort, nearly knocking him down. When I said we needed to talk now, my voice was strange and strained through the mask. Jack looked perplexed, but I was already pulling him away from Lucas and toward the roof. Lucas seemed to observe us. I looked back and saw a different smile. He appeared to be solving a riddle and enjoying it too much. Jack asked what was wrong, but I couldn't respond. My throat was constricted and all I wanted to do was escape Lucas before he found it out. We passed a group of individuals costumed as horror movie figures, and I kept my head down, dragging Jack faster, my hands trembling so badly I could hardly hold him. I pulled Jack behind a large heating unit on the building's side to block Lucas. My hands were trembling so much I grabbed Jack's shirt to stand. Under all the costume layers, perspiration ran down my back. Jack stared at me with anxiety and asked again what was wrong with me. I pushed myself to let go of his shirt and breathe, then asked him about the man he was embracing, how he knew him, and where they met. My voice seemed desperate even to me, and I loathed it. I needed to know how severe this was and how far Lucas had gone into Jack's life. Jack seemed even more bewildered and claimed it was Lucas from work, that he was assisting Oliver with a huge client project, and that they'd become friends over the previous few months. He stated Lucas was a terrific man, dedicated, and successful, and they occasionally had cocktails after late meetings. Because this wasn't a coincidence, every phrase impacted me hard. Lucas was more than simply a party guest. He was part of Jack's professional network, connected to Oliver, and I couldn't ignore him. Jack wondered why it mattered and why I was shivering like a ghost. I knew I had 30 seconds to decide whether to tell him everything or get us out of here first. Jack must have seen something in my eyes because he nodded and led me to the main elevator after I informed him via the mask that we had to go immediately, and that I'd explain everything. I grabbed his arm again and pulled him back, fearing Lucas would see us depart. Would see Jack escort me out with his arm around me. Would piece together my identity. Jack stared at me like I was insane. But I could tell he was starting to comprehend that something was seriously wrong, and that I wasn't overreacting to seeing a former date. On the rooftop, I saw a fire escape sign near a service entrance on the other side from Lucas. Instead of running, I pulled Jack that way with my head down and as quickly as I could. A vampire couple came around a corner and nearly hit us. I startled and jumped backward against Jack. He tightened his grasp on my hand and seemed to understand. He realized something was badly wrong, even if he didn't know what. I pushed past the hefty door onto a concrete stairs at the service entrance, which clanged loudly and reverberated across the empty area. I leaned against the cold concrete wall to breathe, body shaking, heart racing, hurting. Jack stood there, troubled but patient, not forcing me to explain but definitely wanting to know what was occurring. Party music blared through the walls as people laughed outside the door. All those regular Halloween sounds sounded odd compared to my dread. Because of the perspiration, my legs were weak and I had to lock my knees to stand. My makeup ran under the mask. Jack almost touched my shoulder but stopped. Maybe knowing that I needed space and was barely keeping it together. I took a few big breaths and attempted to stop shivering sufficiently to explain why we raced away from his work friend like he was dangerous. I asked Jack if Lucas and he were buddies or simply nice coworkers, and he could see I was desperate. Jack described them as pleasant yet distant. Mostly professional, getting cocktails to discuss the project. What was so important that I was shaking over a person from his office? He was trying to figure out why his girlfriend had taken him away from a party and was experiencing a panic attack on a stairway. Part of me wanted to lie about being unwell or having a horrible past with Lucas-looking people. I knew it wouldn't work anymore. Not after my reaction. I let Jack carefully raise my mask to view my face. Sweat was smearing my makeup and possibly streaking my cheeks in black, and I knew my eyes looked panicked and crazy. I watched him analyze my face to find out what was making me so terrified. What made me tremble in a stairway after being delighted about our first public event? He appeared worried and puzzled, but he didn't realize the depth of terror. Lacked awareness that this was more than worry or social discomfort. I forced myself to tell him the truth I'd suppressed since we started dating. My voice broke as I said Lucas had harmed me deeply. I told Jack Lucas was my ex, that he put me in the hospital, threatened to murder everyone I dated after him, and that he didn't know who I was or that we were together. I rushed my words and saw Jack's expression shift as he comprehended them. I saw him move from perplexed to astonished, to angry and disbelieving. The blood transfusion, stairs and stove burner kept coming up in my conversation. All the things I'd never want to say, particularly to Jack, especially on a concrete stairway while Lucas was above us, undoubtedly confused about where we went. I could see Jack was processing everything since his expression changed so quickly. Moving from perplexed, to surprised to wanting to march upstairs and face Lucas immediately. He opened his mouth and I knew what he would say. I grabbed his shirt with both hands and pushed him closer, urging him to listen and realize that Lucas wasn't just an angry ex but dangerous in ways Jack couldn't conceive. That confronting him will worsen things. Jack's jaw was tense, and I could see he wanted to correct this. But I spoke quickly and quietly, emphasizing that Lucas had money, contacts, and a fury that made regular people appear calm. I was gripping his shirt when I heard footsteps coming down the stairway from above. Heavy boots on concrete stiffened my body. A security guard halted when he spotted us around the bend. He reached for his belt-mounted radio like he was calling for aid. He inquired if we were okay and examined my face, Jack's, and the plague doctor mask I was carrying in one hand. I knew we looked like something awful had happened or was about to happen. Jack quickly said I wasn't feeling good and we were going. Despite shivering as his arm touched mine, his voice was firm. The security guy looked at us again, and I attempted to appear ill instead of afraid, which was easy since I thought I would puke up. Jordan introduced himself and offered to take us to the service elevator to escape the main party area. Because I was used to doing everything alone, his sweet speech made my throat tighten. I thanked him and he nodded and resumed walking, signaling us to follow. We entered a back hallway with concrete walls and exposed pipes through a door I hadn't seen. It was the building's bowels that guests weren't intended to view, not the lobby. Jack held my back without pushing as Jordan moved ahead. I focused on walking instead of wondering about Lucas above us. We saw the roof via a little window. It was a mistake to glance through. Lucas stood near the elevator doors with his phone out, scanning the throng for someone. My stomach fell so severely I stopped walking, and Jack looked at me. Saw Lucas and his hand pressed tighter against my back like he was shielding me even though we were concealed. Lucas presumably texted Oliver about Jack's girlfriend right now, using his calculated approach to determine if the plague doctor who fled was me. Jordan noticed we paused and returned. Asked if we needed a minute, and I pushed myself to move since gazing at Lucas through the glass wasn't helping. Jordan gave me a business card from his pocket in the service elevator. Tell me to call building security if I need anything and that he'll note tonight in case of difficulties. I almost dropped the card with shaky hands. I thanked him again, remembering that an official knew something had happened, even if he didn't know the details. Jack and I entered the service elevator, and Jordan held it for a while and advised us to get home safely before closing it. I walked to my car in the parking garage on legs that felt like they might give up. Jack asked again if he might follow me home, but I told him I needed time to think tonight. I got in my vehicle and attempted to put the key in the ignition, but my hands were trembling too much. I had to pause, close my eyes, and perform the breathing exercises my previous therapist taught me, counting to 4 on the inhale and 6 on the exhale, until my hands were steady enough to start the car. I received a text from Jack asking whether I reached my car, and whether he was sure I didn't want him to follow. I replied that I needed to be alone tonight and would be okay, even though I wasn't sure. I drove out of the parking garage and checked my rearview mirror every few seconds, thinking every car behind me was Lucas, even though I knew he was upstairs at the party. I squeezed the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles became white and my fingers hurt. I had to remind myself to breathe every few minutes since my chest tightened from lack of air. I took strange turns and doubled back to make sure no one was following me, making the travel home twice as lengthy. After pulling into my apartment building's lot, I was fatigued and shivering and wanted to be shut in. Before leaving my car, I checked the parking lot for 5 minutes to make sure no other cars had followed me in, then sprinted to my building's door and across the lobby to the stairs since I couldn't bear an elevator. Once I got inside my apartment with all the locks and chains on, I went to my phone and checked every app to make sure my location services were off and my social media accounts were still deleted as they had been for 2 years. I updated my email, banking, streaming, and grocery delivery app passwords. After reviewing my Lucas security checklist, I activated 2-factor authentication on anything that didn't already have it. Concrete work stabilized my hands. Something that felt like self-defense instead than running away. I glanced at Jack's number for a while. I needed to tell him everything, but wasn't sure I could say it again. I opened my voice memo app and pushed record, then forced myself to explain the essentials while keeping my voice calm by focusing on facts rather than feelings. I told him Lucas struck me so hard I needed a blood transfusion. About the night he held my hand over the stove burner until I vowed never to talk to another man. Probably when he tossed me down the stairs for smiling at a barista. About his threat to murder me if he spotted me with someone else so I'd have to watch. I explained why I kept my history private. Why no social media. Why I always looked over my shoulder. Why I worked so hard to keep our connection private. I stopped recording and forwarded it to Jack before I could doubt myself or delete it and try again. My hands were still trembling after filming, so I almost dropped my phone when it rang less than 10 minutes later. Jack's speech was controlled, but I could see he was struggling. I said I was okay and safe when he inquired. I locked myself in my flat with all my security measures. After a while, he stated he felt ill that he'd introduced me to Lucas without knowing he'd be friends with someone who'd wounded me so deeply. I told him he couldn't have known since I hadn't informed him, which is why I'd kept my history so secret. He inquired my immediate needs. I responded I didn't know but we should consider calling the cops. There was another long delay before he said it would require a report and formal review. I said that Lucas was never charged because I went away instead of filing charges because I was too terrified to confront him in court or cope with attorneys and investigations. Jack inquired why I hadn't reported it, and I could tell he was confused at how someone could get away with it. I attempted to explain that reporting abuse isn't easy, that I'd been isolated and afraid, and that going to the police would just make Lucas angrier and more dangerous. When Jack informed me Oliver had been pressuring him to join Lucas's initiative, the discussion changed. Jack was meant to attend a large customer dinner next week. After realizing this wasn't simply about avoiding Lucas at random places, my chest tightened and I had to sit on the floor. It was nearly hard to navigate Jack's professional world without him. Jack suggested he could skip the meal, but Alan would think it was odd and hurt his project. I told him I understood, but I expected him to be honest with me about every Lucas encounter from now on. We spent another 20 minutes discussing what this meant for us, and if we could keep dating if Lucas was always at Jack's business. We decided to tackle it day by day and assess our resources before making significant choices. Jack vowed not to mention me at work or tell Lucas about his personal life. After we got off the phone, I opened my laptop and searched Google for domestic abuse options in the city, clicking on websites until I located a free consultation legal advocacy organization. I saved their web page and posted their phone number on a sticky note on my fridge to see it every day. Even though I was afraid to execute it, having a plan made me feel more in control than in the prior several hours. I attempted to sleep that night, but every corridor sound or parking lot car door shutting kept me awake. I was weary and had gritty eyes in the morning. I was also resolved not to be paralyzed by dread. I brewed coffee and waited on my couch until the advocacy organization opened at 9 o'clock. At 9, I called the number and a woman answered on the second ring. I told that I needed help with a hazardous ex who had returned to my life and my voice was steadier than expected. She asked me a few basic questions and booked a consultation for later that week. I added 3 reminder notifications to my phone calendar. Jack texted me mid-morning that Lucas had questioned Oliver about the plague doctor costumed party girl. Oliver explained that it was his cousin visiting from another city, which gave me 5 seconds of peace until Jack said Lucas appeared genuinely intrigued and kept asking what the cousin looked like and if she was single. I read that text 3 times and felt my hands shake again because Lucas was actively researching if the plague doctor was me. I spent the next hour checking every window lock and door chain in my flat twice to ensure security. I was horrified to find that Lucas knew my area since he dropped me off close here when we were dating before I had a car and relied on him for transportation. I never told him my building or apartment number, but he knew the approximate area, probably within a few blocks, which was too near for comfort or safety. I was worthless at work and couldn't focus for more than a few minutes. Sarah, my coworker, asked if I was okay because I looked fatigued and stared into space. I fabricated insomnia and caffeine overconsumption. However, I watched the door every time someone passed our office, almost expecting Lucas to find me here too. I walked to my car to have lunch and saw a black automobile idling across the parking lot with a driver. I observed for 10 minutes while eating my lunch and the automobile didn't move. Sat with the engine running. My hands were trembling so violently that I had to snap 4 photographs before I could see the license plate. I started a new document on my phone and named it Evidence Log, then entered the date, time, location, plate number, and description of the driver through the tinted windows. I felt paranoid and even insane. It seemed necessary, like I was creating a case, even though I didn't know why, or if anybody would take it seriously. I couldn't turn off my apartment lights that night. I slept with my phone charged on the pillow next to me and the knife back beneath my mattress, where it had been for 2 years before I met Jack. I hated being afraid again. Just one elevator encounter had shattered the delicate sense of safety I'd been establishing with Jack for months. The next morning, I traveled to Sophie's office in a downtown office building that appeared like any other, making me feel safer than if it had been designated for abuse victims. Soft seats, periodicals, and a water cooler were in the waiting room. Sophie came out to collect me in jeans and a sweater, not the professional work clothing I expected. She was probably mid-30s. She took me to a small windowed office and locked the door. Then sat across from me with a notepad and waited while I chose where to start. Sophie listened as I started with Halloween night and the elevator, then proceeded backward to explain why seeing Lucas was so horrible, even when I had to pause and breathe through the blood transfusion and stove flame. When I reached Lucas's warning to harm any man I dated, Sophie scribbled and highlighted twice. After I finished talking, she looked up and said, "What I was describing was a clear pattern of domestic violence, and that courts take threats like Lucas's very seriously." Hearing her say it so calmly and professionally made it feel more real, like my fear wasn't just paranoia but a real threat that others could see. Sophie took out a huge binder and said that I needed to document everything and that even the rooftop encounter qualified as contact, even though Lucas didn't know it was me. She advised me to report the threat and strange automobile to the police. If nothing came of it right now, it would start an official record that may be relevant later. She put down the police station location and a known good case officer. They then went over a safety plan with me, inquiring about my daily habits and vulnerabilities. We spent almost an hour planning emergency contacts, escape routes, and event documentation. Sophie provided me a binder with information sheets, phone numbers, and directions for if Lucas came up at my apartment or business. When I left her office, I held this folder like a shield to my chest. For the first time since the elevator, I felt active instead of hiding and praying Lucas wouldn't find me. From Sophie's office, I drove directly to the police station, without thinking since I'd lose my nerve if I went home first. The station was crowded with people making reports and cops strolling about, so I waited 20 minutes in a hard plastic chair, watching the clock and trying not to second-guess myself. A lady in uniform called my name and introduced herself as Officer Rebecca Lane, then walked me to a tiny private room with a table, 2 seats, and a tissue box. A former partner stalked and threatened me, so I reported it. Officer Rebecca Lane took out a paperwork and asked questions calmly and professionally, making them simpler to respond. She requested precise dates, times, and details, and asked if I had any evidence of the threats. I gave her my phone with the parking lot license plate photo and detailed the Halloween rooftop encounter. Officer Rebecca Lane meticulously filled out the paperwork. When I described Lucas's warning to murder any man I dated, she paused, looked up and asked me to repeat it. She copied everything I said. He questioned whether anybody else had heard him make that threat, and I had to answer it was only us in his flat. She said she had no proof Lucas was in the rental car or knew my address. Not much could be done immediately. But she gave me her direct number on the back of her card and advised me to call if anything else happened, even anything tiny. She also indicated she'd save the report and that it would help take action swiftly if Lucas did anything again. Jack phoned that evening as I was preparing supper or trying to prepare it, primarily looking at the pasta water waiting to boil. He seemed more nervous than normal and informed me Oliver had indicated Lucas was inquiring around the office about Jack's personal life, particularly if he was seeing anybody serious. After Oliver shut it down and shifted the conversation, Jack claimed he could see Lucas was intrigued and kept attempting to bring up Jack's girlfriend. Jack stated Lucas had inquired if Jack was serious about anybody, what she was like, and if Oliver had met her. These seemingly innocent questions that seemed intrusive until you learned the context. Jack's voice showed he was now seeing that this wasn't only about my previous trauma, but about current danger. Lucas was aggressively seeking to identify me. I asked Jack if he would avoid Lucas at work, the client dinner next week, and other situations where they may encounter. Long pause on other end of line. He seemed to be considering how ditching a big project would affect his career and how Alan and their employer would see him. He agreed, saying my safety was more vital than any job or customer. Hearing him say that was extremely relieving. I felt awful since I knew it may hurt him professionally. The next day, I saw my building manager in the security office, a small room with monitors showing parking, garage, and lobby viewpoints. I handed him the license plate photo on my phone and asked if we could examine the footage from that day. He opened it up and we went through hours of blurry footage to find a partial view of the same car in the garage corner for over an hour. The manager noted the date and time and told the front desk personnel to monitor for the car and phone me if it returned. He volunteered to walk me to my car any late-night work session. My building official knowing about the incident made me feel safer, like I wasn't alone. Later that afternoon, Jack sent me screenshots of Lucas's casual queries about Jack's dating life and personality. If Lucas wasn't my violent ex looking for information, these messages would appear regular and nice. Jack's girlfriend's Halloween party preferences were questioned. Another inquired whether she lived close. Each question was framed like Lucas was talking, yet it seemed like he was getting closer. Screenshots were saved to a new phone folder called Evidence and added to the document I began. My hands shook as I put in the dates and times because I could tell. Lucas was eager to find me. That night, I found a tiny arrangement of flowers at my apartment door after work. Cheap supermarket flowers in transparent plastic wrap without a card or note. Instead of calling the police, I took photos of them from every aspect, including close-ups of the flowers, wrapping, and door. I returned to my car and took a plastic shopping bag from the trunk to pick up the flowers without touching them, trembling my hands as I carried them to the garbage behind the building. I threw them away and stood there breathing, trying to calm down enough to walk upstairs to my apartment since I had no proof Lucas had left those flowers, and I couldn't think of anybody else who would leave them without a card. The notion of his knowing my specific address chilled me to the core. After locking myself in my room upstairs, I called Jack to hear his voice and tell him about the roses before I lost my nerve. On the second ring, he inquired whether I unintentionally disclosed my neighborhood to Lucas or Oliver, and I could hear his shame before I described what occurred. I informed him about throwing away the cardless flowers. He waited a long time before asking me to recount every communication he'd had with Lucas or Oliver that included my name or whereabouts. We talked for 20 minutes, with me asking specific questions about what he said and when, and Jack growing defensive before apologizing. Jack ultimately confessed that he had told Oliver that his girlfriend lived in the Arts District 3 weeks earlier, because Oliver had urged him to try a new restaurant there. The words hit hard since the arts area is only 4 blocks wide, and Lucas could easily find my building with that knowledge and some basic research. I asked Jack to reconsider if he'd stated anything more that may assist Lucas find me. Jack continued apologizing and said he didn't know Lucas was dangerous, therefore it didn't matter. I told Jack I needed to pack a suitcase and stay someplace else for a few days since Lucas could know the neighborhood and I didn't feel comfortable in my flat anymore. Jack offered to let me stay with him, but I said it was too obvious. Lucas would search there if he was pursuing me. I had to go somewhere Lucas wouldn't check. Ava answered my phone with loud music while I was packing my workout bag and stepped outdoors to hear me better. She didn't question why I wanted to rest on her couch for a few nights. She just said to come over and she'd make up the couch with new sheets. Ava's building across town includes nighttime security with cameras and a front desk. I felt safer away from my area, even though Lucas could find me anywhere. I took my laptop, phone charger, and Lucas documentation folder. Before departing, check each window lock again. I watched my mirrors the whole 30 minutes to Ava's, afraid every set of headlights behind me were Lucas's following me to my new hiding position. Ava woke me at 9 p.m. She dragged me inside her apartment without asking questions, pointing to the couch with blankets and pillows and telling me to relax. After I set my bag down and gathered my breath, I told Ava I wanted to rehearse what I'd say in court if I applied for a protection order. She grabbed a paper and pen and sat across from me to listen. I tried to speak the history with Lucas out loud, keeping my voice steady and sticking to the facts like Sophie had advised me, but I kept feeling overwhelmed and hurrying over the scary portions. Ava stopped me twice to encourage me to breathe and calm down, documenting dates and incidents for my statement. We talked for nearly an hour as Ava wrote down my thoughts, starting with the abuse background and ending with the roses at my door. She asked wonderful questions about timings and evidence, helping me determine which aspects were legal and which were emotional trauma that wouldn't convince a court. By the end, I had 3 pages of Ava's handwritten notes, a clear statement structure and a sense of preparedness, albeit I was still afraid. The next morning, Officer Rebecca Lane phoned as I was enjoying coffee at Ava's kitchen table to tell me the license plate I'd photographed belonged to a rental car firm, meaning the driver picked an untraceable automobile. She added this information to my police report and stated the conduct was worsening and that she strongly advised me to file for a temporary protection order since waiting was risky. I thanked her and vowed to get to the courthouse soon, then stared at my phone after we disconnected up since the rental vehicle detail made things feel more genuine and planned. An hour later, Jack wrote that Oliver had indicated Lucas being considered for a promotion with more client-facing responsibilities and greater compensation. I felt nauseous reading those lines while hiding on a rented couch. I felt unjust that Lucas's career was improving while I was displaced from my flat and afraid to travel alone. The fury was so powerful that I resolved to go with the protection order, regardless of Jack's employment position. I used my phone to email Jordan from building security, requesting him to make a brief statement about seeing me agitated in the stairs on Halloween night. Jordan sent me a professionally written incident report within 2 hours, noting the date, time and my evident panic when he discovered me. I put it to my evidence folder, happy that someone official had documented that moment. Sophie said she had time that afternoon to meet with me to put together my court packet once I sent her the incident report. I met Sophie in the Advocacy Center at 3 p.m., and we organized everything on her conference table into a clear sequence of escalating risk. My written statement about the abuse history was first, then Lucas's threat to kill any man I dated, then Jordan's rooftop incident report, then Officer Rebecca Lane's rental car report, then the flowers photo, then Jack's screenshots of Lucas's invasive questions, and finally Jordan's security incident report. Looking at it all in one packet made the risk feel real and recorded, like I was making a case instead of being terrified and worried. Sophie helped me prepare a cover letter stating why I needed the protection order and what limits I wanted. She reminded me that judges regarded threats of violence seriously, especially if abuse was documented. Jack called 11 p.m. that night. Unsettled. He said he was in a pub with workmates when Lucas arrived up and lost his fury at the bartender over getting the wrong drink. Jack said Lucas raged at this young bartender, making the pub go silent, calling him dumb and inept over a mistake regarding whether the cocktail should contain ice. Everyone at the work table looked uncomfortable, and Oliver tried to calm Lucas, but Lucas tossed money on the bar and rushed off, still ranting. Jack recounted me this story with a new voice, like he now got my explanation about Lucas being harmful. That witnessing the wrath firsthand was different than hearing about it. Jack contacted me again the next day to say he was done trying to manage the job issue cautiously and wanted to talk to his employer about the conflict of interest and be removed from Lucas projects. Hearing him say that made me relieved yet worried about his career. I told him to choose his career above my safety if he had to because I couldn't bear the guilt of damaging his job. Jack paused before explaining he'd decided my safety was more essential than any project or promotion. 2 days later, Jack went to Officer Rebecca Lane's station and submitted a formal written statement describing Lucas's threatening behavior at the bar and his persistent questions about Jack's girlfriend, connecting Lucas's violent temper to his interest in Jack's personal life. Officer Rebecca Lane phoned me that afternoon to say she'd added Jack's statement to my case file and that it bolstered my petition by describing Lucas's wrath and his history of attempting to gather information about me. I checked my work email the next morning and felt sick when I noticed a message from an unfamiliar address. A random mix of numbers and letters. When I opened the email, the subject line was blank and the text included 4 words. I miss you. A photo was attached, and I knew not to open it. But my hands clicked before my brain could stop them. Image loaded of my office building from the parking lot. It appears the photographer was sitting in a vehicle at the entrance where I parked every day. I quickly forwarded the email to Officer Rebecca Lane without replying. My hands were trembling so much I had to hold my phone against the desk to avoid dropping it. She phoned me back within 20 minutes and urged me to keep the original email with all the header information to track its origin. Despite her calm, professional voice, I could detect her concern when she inquired if I felt secure coming to work that day. After calling in ill and staying at Ava's apartment, I told her I couldn't focus since Lucas had photographed my office. Officer Rebecca Lane added the email to my case file and claimed it revealed a pattern of spying and intimidation that would bolster my protection order petition. Taking my evidence folder, I traveled to court that afternoon. The documents, images and statements I collected were so dense the folder hardly closed. The file clerk read my petition and set a 10-day hearing, noting the date on a paper and giving me a copy with instructions on what to bring. Can I receive protection sooner than 10 days? If the judge found urgent danger, she suggested I may file an emergency interim order. She sent me to another waiting room where I waited over 2 hours watching legal cases arrive and go. When my name was called, a court officer escorted me into a tiny room where a judge reviewed documents at a desk. She glanced at me and asked why I needed emergency protection. I practiced the basics while maintaining my voice. The blood transfusion, stove burner, death threat, rooftop encounter, flowers, rental vehicle surveillance, Jack's testimony regarding Lucas's wrath, and now the email with my workplace photo. The court carefully examined my evidence folder, looking over each tab and reading the images and statements. After finishing, she glanced at me and stated the emergency interim order was effective immediately. She said Lucas would receive documents instructing him to keep away from me and that any contact or approach might result in his arrest. Relief was nearly tangible. But then came fear over Lucas's reaction to those publications. Using Oliver's knowledge on Lucas's steady training regimen, Officer Rebecca Lane arranged with the sheriff's office to serve Lucas at his gym. The service was 2 days later during his morning session, and I spent the day at Ava's place hardly functioning. I checked my phone every few minutes for a sign that everything went well or that Lucas had erupted and done something awful. Officer Rebecca Lane texted me about noon to say the service was over, and Lucas took the papers without problem. However, the deputy maintained he read them quietly and still. That night, while watching a movie on Ava's couch, my phone buzzed with a notice from an old social media account I'd forgotten I had. The message came from a generic named, photoless profile. 2 phrases chilled me. "This is a mistake and you know it." I screenshotted the message, reported the account to the platform, and emailed everything to Officer Rebecca Lane, who phoned me immediately. She verified that Lucas had been clearly warned not to contact me directly or indirectly, therefore this violated the interim order. She stated she'd document the violation and add it to the complete hearing material, and Lucas might be arrested if he contacted me again. The next afternoon, Ava returned home rattled from errands and informed me she saw Lucas or someone like him across the street from her building. She contacted the police immediately and waited in her car. Officers arrived after the individual was gone. They added her statement to my case file, showing that Lucas had found where I was staying despite my best efforts to leave no trace. Ava's call was answered by 2 police officers who drove by her building and checked the streets for almost an hour. One of them phoned Lucas personally to tell him that they were aware of his being near me and that any further contact would result in instant arrest. I listened to Officer Rebecca Lane tell this story over the phone, and felt both relieved and terrified that he would not be stopped. Jack called that night to tell me that Alan had informed him that HR had investigated Lucas after receiving an anonymous complaint about his workplace aggression. Jack believed the bartender filed the complaint after seeing Lucas's rage over the improper drink. Alan noted that Lucas had been withdrawn from all client-facing meetings during the inquiry, which indicated that his career repercussions were now catching up with him. The next day, Jack wrote on Instagram about domestic abuse awareness without naming individuals but made his point. He blacklisted Lucas on every platform and informed Alan he would never work on Lucas projects again. I was affected by this public support, even though I knew it may cost Lucas professionally and cause issues with Lucas's co-workers. Sophie and I prepared my evidence in a back corner of a coffee shop 3 days before the hearing. She advised me to be cool and remember that the court wanted to hear specific abuse events with dates and facts, not broad remarks about being terrified. She explained the hearing, who would be there, and what would happen in sequence. We rehearsed responding judges' questions. She reminded me to bring tissues because crying was allowed. Showing emotion strengthened my case by being honest and sincere. On hearing day, I wore a basic black dress and cardigan to seem professional. I brought my whole evidence folder with color-coded tabs and highlighters, sorted chronologically with comments on what each document showed. Sophie met me in the courthouse corridor and we sat on a bench to study my statement and highlight critical topics. Before my case was called, she held my hand as I started shaking. Her hold was firm and warm as my body shivered with terror of seeing Lucas again in court. Sophie escorts me inside the courtroom where Lucas sits at a table with his lawyer when my case is called. Despite feeling him watching at me, I keep my eyes on the judge's face. The judge requests my abuse history. I describe the blood transfusion and how Lucas hit me so hard 2 years ago that I required emergency surgery. Even though my fists are gripped so tightly beneath the table that my nails bite into my palms, my voice is stronger than expected. He held my hand over the stove burner until I pledged never to talk to other guys. My last meeting with him included a death threat to harm anyone I dated. The court learns about my Halloween rooftop meeting with Jack, the flowers that came at my apartment door without a card, and the emails from strange addresses stating he missed me. The judge takes notes while I tell about Ava citing Lucas's description outside her building where I was staying. Her expression was focused. My speech is pretty steady despite my body trembling. After I finish, the judge asks Lucas to speak. His lawyer steps up and talks about misunderstandings and coincidences, claiming that the rooftop meeting was merely uncomfortable socializing and that the flowers might have come from anybody. After interrupting him, the court says the pattern of behavior is evident and troubling. She extends the protection order for 1 year and states that Lucas cannot contact me directly or indirectly, cannot enter within 500 feet of my home or office, and cannot question anybody I know about me. Strong relief makes me dizzy. My face is neutral since Lucas is still in the room and I don't want him to notice my fear. Lucas and his lawyer are told by court security to depart through a different entrance to avoid crossing paths in the corridor. Lucas stands up and walks toward a side exit with his lawyer. They close the door and my legs give out. Sophie puts her hand on my shoulder and tells me I did well in there as I sit down hard on the nearest bench. Over the next week, I adjust my work schedule drastically. Instead of Lucas's timetable, I arrive and depart at random times. I join exercise classes at a new gym across town and switch coffee shops from my flat to my office. No one can follow my trend because I buy at a different food store in a different area on various days. Sophie helped me build this plan to move less predictably. Following through with each adjustment lets me feel in control rather than reacting to dread. Jack and I have a long chat about our relationship now that everything is out in the open, and we agree to take things easy and be honest about Lucas's contacts and overlaps. We write a basic agreement that none of us will retain Lucas-related secrets, even if they seem tiny or inconsequential, because those facts kept me safe when I needed them most. Jack will notify me promptly if Lucas contacts him or if Alan discusses Lucas's employment condition, and I will notify Jack of any suspicious incidences or safety plan revisions. I get 8 hours of unbroken sleep in Ava's flat, my first since Halloween. Wake up feeling almost normal for the first time in weeks. Ava cooks pancakes in her little kitchen, and I tell her this is the first morning I haven't woken up with my pulse beating and checked locks or windows first. Ava returns with me to my apartment the next day and we complete a full safety check, including the new locks put while I was with her. To ensure proper recording, we test the hallway security camera. We keep pepper spray near the entrance and on my bedside table. Walking back into my space feels like regaining what Lucas attempted to take from me, and I'm happy I didn't let fear keep me away forever. Jack contacts me that afternoon with word from Alan that Lucas's suspension has been prolonged while HR reviews his allegations and that the huge project Lucas was overseeing has been fully reallocated to a different team. Officer Rebecca Lane contacts me the following day to ensure that Lucas hasn't broken the protection order since the hearing and provides me her number to call if he does. Since the order is in place, she says the first report phase is closed, but she'll keep the case file active in case I need to add anything. Sophie refers me to a domestic violence trauma counselor. I book my intake for next week. Knowing I'll have professional help for the lengthy healing process makes the future less daunting, like I'm creating a foundation for recovery instead of just existing. My new apartment nighttime ritual includes preparing tea in my favorite cup and reading for an hour before bed. It makes me feel comfortable and grounded. I now calmly verify the door lock and check the security camera feed on my phone to ensure my safety. I put the knife back in the kitchen drawer instead than under my mattress. I still hear every hallway sound, but I don't jump at them. In the apartment above me, I hear my neighbors arriving home from work and kids running. I don't panic anymore at typical sounds. The protection order is working, so I don't need to constantly adding to my desk's evidence folder. Jack texts me to inquire how I'm doing, and I say I'm okay and feeling secure again for the first time in years. I open the evidence record on my laptop again and type the last item, timestamp it and noting that the protection order is live. I write that my support network is strong, my boundaries are clear, and I have resources if Lucas attempts anything. A list is crucial to view in the conclusion. Sophie's activism via her office and emergency line. Call Officer Rebecca Lane's cell anytime, day or night. Jack's informed partnership now that he building security contact for Jordan. Understands all and supports me. Ava's question-free zone, including my hefty binder of documentation that I took genuine precautions. Because losing this record would compromise my safety, I save and back it up 3 times. I close the laptop and glance about my flat, taking in the new locks and security measures that make it feel like mine again instead of a hiding spot. Putting the knife back in the kitchen drawer and not checking the window locks for 2 days seems like progress, even if it's tiny. I take out my Halloween plague doctor outfit from my bedroom closet, the long black cloak and beaked mask that masked me effectively that night. A storage box is sealed with tape and placed in the back of the closet behind my winter jackets after I neatly fold everything. It seems like denying Halloween if I toss it away. But I'm not keeping it visible daily either. I still feel the elevator-induced terror when I think of Lucas. But it comes in fewer waves. Fear no longer guides my choices. He's not locking me in my flat or panicking at every hallway sound. I am learning to be careful without letting it paralyze me and prevent me from living. At Thanksgiving, my parents demanded money for my brother's shady business, claiming it's what family does. Months later, they're all facing lawsuits. I suppose the best way to start is to admit that I no longer communicate with my family. It is not the result of a single argument or a spectacular fallout. It was a lifetime of minor things that grew into large things, and I realized I was best off keeping my distance. Here's how things went. My name is Ethan. I'm 28, and I've spent the most of my adult life attempting to fix the harm that growing up in my family created. My parents, Michael and Jennifer, raised me and my younger brother Jacob in an environment that felt more like a competition than a family. My father was the type of man who felt that severe love meant never showing any. My mother wasn't doing any better. They were continually comparing me to Jacob, grade sports, friends, and whatever else they could think of. They did not congratulate me on receiving an A's while he received a D. They just asked why I wasn't teaching him how to perform better. Jacob was always seen as the family's future, even while he was failing school and getting in trouble. I was the dependable one, the one they did not worry about. It sounds like a compliment, but it's not. It just meant I was invisible. By the time I was 20, I was so anxious to go that I departed for college across the country and never looked back. We had little communication after that. They would call sometimes, mainly when Jacob needed money or to remind me that family came first. My last visit before losing touch for good was over 4 years ago, and it was a disaster. Jacob got drunk and made a terrible joke about my then girlfriend Sophie, who is now my wife. That night, I knew he wasn't just jealous of my life. He was obsessed with her. At first I believed I was exaggerating, but his conduct throughout the years proved otherwise. He sent her improper messages on social media, contacted her late at night to speak, and once showed up unannounced at her workplace. He informed reception that he was surprising me, so they allowed him stay near her desk. It was neither fun nor harmless. It was creepy. Sophie blocked him on everything. I informed him that if he ever contacted her again, I would call the police. He backed off, but I had the sensation it wasn't finished. Life without them was serene. Sophie and I created a life that we were proud of. Good jobs, a tiny yet comfortable flat. We'd be moving into a tiny house in the spring. Friends that treated me more like family than my own family ever did. That item remained until approximately a month ago, when an envelope arrived in our mailbox with no return address. Inside was a card with a turkey on it, and a note from my mother. We are hosting Thanksgiving this year. It has been too long. The whole family will be present. We expect you both to attend. Classic control maneuver. There's no RSVP information, it's just a demand. I text her anyhow. We'd love to see you. There is no hope you will make it. We simply expect you. It was classic for them. Not an invitation, but a demand. My initial inclination was to toss it away. Sophie glanced at me and said, "Maybe we should go. Not for them, but for us. We shouldn't be afraid of seeing your family," she added. "And maybe it's time to put this behind us." I wasn't sure, but she had a point. We planned to start a family soon, and part of me felt that I needed closure before becoming a father. If nothing else, I wanted to face my parents in the eye and make it obvious that their and Jacob's behavior was no longer acceptable. So, against my better judgment, I texted my mother to say we'd be there. I regretted it as soon as I pushed submit. A week later, the first signs that this was a mistake appeared. Sophie was folding clothes when her phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. The message read, "Can't wait to see you again. I've missed your smile." We both knew who it was, even though there was no name or background. Jacob. He had not altered. If anything, he felt empowered. Sophie blocked the call without replying, but I sat there gazing at the screen, my gut tight. I wanted to think that this Thanksgiving would be different. Perhaps they had changed or grown up a little. But deep inside I knew the truth. People like my parents do not change. Jacob surely does not. If anything, I suspected that this supper would exacerbate the situation. Nevertheless, we decided to go. Perhaps it was stubbornness. Maybe I simply wanted to tackle the matter directly on rather than having it linger in the background forever. I warned Sophie before bed that night. If anything happens, anything, we leave. There are no second chances. She agreed. We both realized we weren't simply returning home for Thanksgiving. We were returning to a location I had spent the most of my life trying to avoid. The trip to my folks' house seemed longer than usual. Sophie gazed out the window the majority of the time, and I could see she was attempting to remain calm. I was too. We hadn't been back in over 4 years, and it seemed like we were traveling through enemy territory. When we got to the house, nothing had changed. Same overdecorated porch, carefully maintained shrubs, and a large Carter family sign tacked over the front door as if it were an estate. My mom had always enjoyed putting on a show for the neighbors, and that hadn't changed. When we got out of the car, the door opened and she rushed out, arms wide, as if she was meeting her long-lost son. "Oh, Danny, look at you!" she exclaimed, holding me tightly before pulling back to scrutinize me. "You look older, tired. I guess city life is harder on you than you thought." Not then a minute had passed, and the first insult had already been delivered. My father appeared behind her, shook my hand with the passion of someone picking up a piece of trash, and then turned his attention to Sophie. "You're even gorgeous than I remember," he murmured a bit too slowly. "A little too near. Jacob's been delighted to meet you." I pretended not to hear that last part. Inside the home was noisy and busy. My mom had invited more people than I expected, including cousins I hadn't seen in years, old neighbors, and even some family friends I barely remembered. Everyone seemed surprised to see me, as if I had just returned from war instead of living 2 states away. We hadn't even been there 10 minutes when Jacob arrived. He came down the stairs with that same smug grin I remembered, wearing a button-down shirt he probably thought made him look important, and walked straight past me, wrapping Sophie in a hug that lasted far too long. "Wow," he said, still holding onto her. "I almost forgot how good you smell." Sophie pulled back, forcing a small polite smile. "Hi Jacob, it has been a while." "It's been too long," he said, leaning closer than he needed to. "We've got a lot to catch up on." I stepped between them and clapped him on the shoulder harder than necessary. "Plenty of time for that later," I said. He smirked and walked away, but not before glancing back at Sophie one more time. She shifted closer to me and whispered, "I already hate this." "We weren't sure you'd come," she commented at one point. "I mean, you're so busy with your important job." My father added, "It's good you could make time for family. Most people would have prioritized it from the start." Jacob, of course, sat next to Sophie, and every time she talked, he laughed too hard. Around midway through the lunch, my father cleared his throat and said, "Listen, Ethan," in that phony, quiet voice he usually used when he was going to say something absurd. "Your mother and I have been doing a lot for Jacob recently, helping him get back on his feet. He's launching an e-commerce automation firm, a ready-made Shopify store managed by a partner that manages inventory and advertising. But we're not getting any younger, and it's becoming more difficult to do on our own." Here it was, the real reason we were invited. "I'm sure you could chip in," he continued. "You're doing well, right? A few thousand to assist your brother out. That is what family is for." I chuckled because I didn't know what else to say. "You're asking me to invest in Jacob's scams?" "Scams? It's a real opportunity, and after everything we've done for you, it's the least you could do," my mom continued, irritated. "Everything you've done for me," I said. "You mean parenting me?" "That's referred to as parenting." Jacob piped up, his tone dripping with faux humility. "I don't need much, just some seed money. Sophie can most likely persuade you to do it. She's always been the more rational person." Sophie put her napkin down and whispered to me, "I want to leave." I wanted to say yes, to walk out of that house and never look back. But I also knew that if we left now, the whole thing would never end. They'd twist the story, make it seem like we were the problem, and nothing changed. "Not yet," I murmured back. "We're going to finish this." She moaned but nodded. We remained until dessert, which was more of the same. Insults cloaked in faux sympathy, strange comments from Jacob and my parents, behaving as if I owed them everything. By the time we left the table, I was fatigued. Sophie and I had hardly slept, and she said she kept waking up during the night, certain she heard footsteps outside our room. I believed her, since this home had always made people feel watched. When I walked out into the hallway to get coffee that morning, Jacob was already there, resting against the wall as if he'd been waiting for me. "Good morning, big brother," he said, grinning. "Sophie, are you awake yet? I was thinking we should go for a stroll. Just the two of us catching up." I didn't answer, just gazed till he chuckled and went away. During breakfast, Jacob's behavior became more obvious. Whenever Sophie moved, he followed her with his eyes, and if she stood up to grab something, he would also stand up. At one point, he reached across the table and brushed her wrist as he passed her the butter, which was completely unnecessary. Sophie froze, then quietly pulled her hand back and looked at me. That expression conveyed everything. I am not good with this. I confronted my mother about it when Jacob left the room. He's crossing lines, I said. You need to tell him to stop. She didn't even glance up from the dishes. Oh, Ethan, don't take things too seriously. Jacob is just affectionate. You know how lonely he has been. Affectionate? I repeated. He's creeping out my wife. She groaned, frustrated. Maybe Sophie should try to be a little nicer. He's your brother. It's not illegal to be friendly. That was their logic. Always justify Jacob and blame someone else. Later that afternoon, we went upstairs to change before supper, and when we returned to our room, there was an envelope on the bed that hadn't been there previously. My stomach fell as soon as I saw Sophie's expression after opening it. The note inside was handwritten and sloppy, making my skin crawl. I worry about you every day. I understand you're not pleased with him. We are intended to be together. I will wait for you as long as it takes. Sophie's hands shook as she handed it to me. He came in here, she muttered, while we were gone. I wanted to storm downstairs right then, but Sophie said, not yet. Just keep it. We could need it. It was the best thing she could have said. I folded the letter and tucked it into my jacket pocket. If things continued like they were, that piece of paper may wind up becoming proof. That evening, Jacob arrived with a newcomer, Nathan, who appeared to be in his late 30s, with a shaved head and a flashy watch, the type of guy who thought expensive cologne made him respectable. He shook my hand as if we were business partners and immediately began discussing opportunities, handing me a card for a storefront LLC I didn't recognize. Months later, the same LLC name appeared in the charging paperwork. Jacob tells me you're doing well for yourself, Nathan said. We're getting ready to launch something major. New investments, great upside. A little support from family might make a big difference. I nearly laughed. I'm not interested. Just think about it, he said, lowering his voice. It's not just about business. Helping family pays off in other ways. The way he said it felt like a threat, not a suggestion. Sophie and I sat in silence for a long time after they left. She looked exhausted and scared. I don't feel safe here, she admitted. He's not just being inappropriate anymore. He's growing more daring. I nodded. I know, and I'm done expecting that everything would go away. That night, I made 2 calls. First, I called a lawyer buddy of mine from college and recounted the problem, the messages, the letter, and the harassment. He advised me to document everything and retain any physical proof. If this escalates, you'll want a record of every event, he added. Then I contacted Grace, an old acquaintance who now worked as a detective. I hadn't spoken to her in a long time, but she didn't hesitate. Keep your phones on you. Keep the material secure and don't approach him alone, she said. If he exceeds a legal boundary, I'll assist you file a complaint. When I hung up, I felt a little more in control. Jacob was crossing a line, and if he pushed it any further, I wanted to make sure I was ready. Sophie was quiet as we got ready for bed, and she asked if we could just leave. Forget the whole thing. A part of me agreed, but another part knew that if we walked away now, he'd never stop. My parents would keep defending him, and Jacob would take it as permission to push harder. Just a little longer, I told her. If he tries anything else, he won't get away with it. This time. And the next time Jacob crossed a line, it wouldn't be something a letter or a phone call could fix. Thanksgiving morning felt tense before anything even started. The house was busier than I'd seen it before. My mother was running around the kitchen barking orders, my father was already in host mode, shaking hands and bragging about Jacob's non-existent business, and Jacob was doing laps around Sophie every chance he got. When we sat down for dinner, there were nearly 35 people packed into the dining room and living room, and the table was covered in food, but I wasn't hungry. My mother came up to give her welcoming speech, and instead of saying anything pleasant, she turned it into a jab. I'm simply so proud of my boys, she began, placing her hand on Jacob's shoulder. One of them has kept true to the family and never forgotten his roots. The other one, well, at least he arrived today. And everyone laughed, even though it wasn't funny. My father followed with his own comment, saying how Jacob was finally stepping into adulthood while I ran off and became a stranger. The cousins then joined in, asking why we didn't visit more often and if we were too good for family now. I didn't respond to anything. Sophie tried to calm me down by holding my hand under the table, but Jacob wasn't going to let the night pass quietly. He was already a few steps past tipsy, slurring his words louder than usual and acting like he owned the room. "So," he said suddenly, clinking his glass, "I just want to say something." The room fell silent. Jacob beamed as if he were preparing to give a speech. "I've always said Sophie and I would have made a great couple," he added, turning to face us. "We both enjoy the same things. She probably would have been happier with me anyhow." The table was silent for a moment, then a few others giggled. My mother laughed the loudest as if it were a light-hearted joke, and my father said, "Well, there's still time. You never know how life turns out." Sophie's face grew scarlet. She murmured something and rose up, claiming she needed to use the restroom. Jacob watched her walk away. I glanced at him and whispered, "Don't." He shrugged, seeming not to understand. I stood up and started walking toward the hallway, ignoring the relatives who tried to stop me to chat. The house was quieter back there, and when I turned the corner, I heard Sophie's muffled voice upstairs, followed by a louder scream. I ran up the stairs and followed the noise to the guest hallway, where she'd gone to the hall bathroom. He'd pushed her into the nearest guest room, but the knob wouldn't turn. It was locked, so I kicked it open. Inside, Jacob was cornering Sophie against the wall, his hand on her arm, and he was leaning in too close. She was pushing him away and yelling for him to stop. When the door slammed open, I saw his face. That same twisted, smug look he always had when he thought he was in control. "Get away from her," I said. "Relax," he said, laughing. "We're just talking." I didn't wait. I grabbed him by the back of his shirt and yanked him away from her. He stumbled, tried to swing at me, missed, and crashed into the dresser. He pushed himself up and lunged forward, shoving me in the chest. I swung back a quick punch to his jaw, sending him back against the wall. Everything turned chaotic. Sophie was crying and trying to pull me back. But Jacob came at me again, swinging wildly, and we crashed into the nightstand, knocking over a lamp. I shoved him down hard, pinning him with my forearm across his chest. "If you ever touch her again," I said, "I'll make sure you regret it." We both froze when we heard my mother screaming from the hallway. She had come running after hearing the noise and was now yelling that I was attacking her poor son. My father also appeared, shouting at me to let go of him. The next few minutes were a blur. Relatives crowded the hallway. Someone called the police. Jacob was pretending to be the victim, yelling that I snapped for no reason. Sophie was trying to explain, but no one was listening. By the time the cops arrived, the house was a shambles, and they separated us all. One officer took my statement in the kitchen, another spoke with Sophie upstairs, and two more questioned Jacob in the living room. They photographed the broken latch and the overturned lamp, recorded the guest room door as damaged, and collected the handwritten letter as evidence. An officer had Sophie export the texts and call logs to a case email on the spot, gave her a victim advocate card with the case number, and confirmed they had body cam footage of the initial statements. One officer pulled me aside in the kitchen and went through everything step by step. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. I explained it from the start. Sophie screamed. The door was locked. Jacob tried to force himself on her, and I pulled him off and defended her. The officer nodded and continued writing. In the living room, Jacob was giving his own version, sitting on the couch with an ice pack on his jaw, crying and telling anyone who would listen that I suddenly attacked him without warning. "He hates me," he said again. "He has always disliked me. I was only trying to talk to Sophie and he lost control." The cops didn't appear persuaded. They'd previously met with Sophie, who had given them the texts, letter and screenshots from months before when Jacob had messaged her things like, "I dream about you every night." She also told them about the incident at her office and the unsolicited phone calls. It wasn't just one night. This had been building for years. Two of my cousins supported her tale, claiming Jacob had boasted an hour earlier, "I'm making a move tonight. She wants me. She just doesn't realize it yet." A little after midnight, they put Jacob in handcuffs and read him his rights. My mother yelled at them to stop calling it a misunderstanding, while my father said Sophie was lying to protect me. None of it mattered. The evidence spoke for itself. One of the cops returned to me and said, "You are free to leave. Based on what we have, Your acts are in defense of another individual. Sophie was sitting on the couch, a blanket over her shoulders, looking at the floor. You won't be charged, I replied, but I wasn't glad. She looked exhausted, as if the whole thing had drained every ounce of energy she had. We left the house around 12:30 a.m. and drove straight home, neither of us speaking because we were both too tired to process what had just happened. I hoped it was over, but it was not. Jacob was released on bail 2 days later. The first thing he did was change his story again, claiming Sophie had been flirting with him all night and that I overreacted out of jealousy. My mother repeated that version of events to anyone who would listen, and within a week, on December 3rd, she posted a 900-word Facebook note claiming Sophie invited Jacob upstairs and that I threatened to kill him, portraying herself as the peacemaker. 2 days later, screenshots of Jacob's DMs from 2019 to 2023, as well as the police incident report, started circulating in the same thread, and the comments flipped hard against her. Then came the lawsuit. My father's lawyer sent me a letter saying they were suing me for assault, emotional damages, and loss of family reputation, demanding $200,000 in damages. I actually laughed when I read it. It wasn't just desperate, it was delusional, but I wasn't going to sit there and let them drag my name through the mud, so I called my lawyer the same day and told him to file a countersuit for defamation, harassment, and emotional distress. We had more than enough evidence, years of messages, the letter, witness statements, and police reports, and my lawyer was confident. If they want to take this to court, they're going to regret it, he added. Meanwhile, Nathan decided to become involved, and a week after the lawsuit, he showed up outside my office building, leaning against his car as if he was expecting me. You don't want to do this, he whispered as I approached. You dismissed the accusations and the lawsuit, and this is over. Keep pushing, and things will get worse. I didn't respond, instead pulling out my phone and starting filming. Are you threatening me? I asked. He glanced past me and answered, It's not a threat. It's advice. I submitted the tape to Grace, who reported it to the police, who added it to the continuing case file. Nathan was now officially involved in the investigation. By the end of that month, prosecutors filed charges of attempted sexual assault, known as assault with intent in our state, as well as felony stalking, harassment, unlawful contact, and violation of a protection order. The DA informed us that they were taking the case seriously due to the evidence and the ongoing pattern of behavior. My countersuit against my parents was moving forward, and Nathan was being monitored for potential witness tampering. Sophie remained tough through it all, meeting with investigators, giving statements, and preparing for court, but I could see how much it was tearing her down. We stopped going out as much, kept our doors secured, and peered over our shoulders more than we cared to admit. After Jacob's arrest, I thought the worst was behind us, but the weeks that followed made Thanksgiving look like a walk in the park. It felt like our entire lives had turned into one long fight, not just against Jacob, but also against the people who were supposed to love us the most. As much as I hated to admit it, I knew it was far from over, and the more we pushed for accountability, the worse it would get. We had obtained a temporary restraining order at his arraignment, and for a while, he seemed to obey it. Then, around 9:30 p.m., I received an alert from our porch camera, and every secret my family had ever tried to keep hidden began to emerge. When I checked the stream, Jacob was standing on our doorway, hands in his pockets, peering at the door. I urged Sophie to remain inside and cracked the door open. You're breaking a court order. Leave now, I screamed. He grinned as if it didn't matter and answered, I just want to talk to her. I slammed the door and phoned 911. Police came 20 minutes later and found him sitting in his car at the end of the driveway. The DA filed a motion to revoke his bail, and this time he didn't go home. However, the civil case and investigation into his finances revealed far more. My lawyer called me one afternoon and said, We found something. Jacob and my father had stolen more than $250,000 from an inheritance account my grandmother had left for my mother. It was intended for her retirement, but they spent it on Jacob's bogus company bills and dubious payments related to Nathan's frauds. The fallout was swift. My parents' reputation suffered greatly once those recordings became public. Friends stopped returning their calls. People they'd known for decades had erased them online. Even their church had alienated itself. Jennifer couldn't bear the humiliation. She began writing long, furious rants online, accusing me and Sophie. She said Sophie had misled Jacob and that I had brainwashed her. In one post, she claimed that I had harmed Jacob as a child, and that he was playing out his pain. Initially, few people believed her. Then screenshots of Jacob's communications, police records, and court documents began circulating. People witnessed the reality. The falsehoods made her appear desperate, and her credibility faded. Nathan's situation also blew up. He was detained by federal officials in a separate fraud investigation involving bogus investment firms. Faced with potential prison time, he agreed to comply. He turned over text messages, bank transactions, and emails that explicitly linked Jacob to money laundering and other illicit activities. Subpoenaed bank documents revealed Jacob's company accounts, with transactions to 2 shell LLCs Nathan controlled occurring within days of withdrawals from my grandmother's bequest. Nathan provided investigators text messages in which he instructed Jacob to divide the deposits and pass them via those entities before returning them. Agents followed the exact method detailed in the fraud case. That drastically altered the tone of the criminal case. What began as an assault and harassment investigation expanded to encompass potential financial crimes. Jacob was no longer merely the weird brother. He was involved in an ongoing investigation into fraud and money laundering. My father began to panic. He contacted my lawyer's office and attempted to bargain, promising to dismiss the case against me, provided I withdrew the countersuit and ceased working with prosecutors. We ignored him. A week later, he left me a voicemail. "You're destroying this family. You'll regret it." I erased it before listening to the remainder. The walls were closing in around them. Jacob's so-called pals turned against him. One of them testified that Jacob boasted about getting rid of me and even threatened to torment Sophie again if he ever got out. People who formerly defended him have vanished. The house where I grew up was damaged twice, with slogans like "liars" and "criminals" spray-painted on the garage door. By the end of the preliminary proceedings, the Carter family name had become a joke. Everyone in town was aware of the attempted attack, restraining order, inheritance theft, and money laundering. My parents had spent decades creating a public image of respectability. They were the cautionary story that everyone whispered about. Sophie and I concentrated on our safety. We changed our phone numbers, increased our home security, and ceased commenting online. Grace provided regular updates on the inquiry. Every time we talked, the same vision got clearer. They were not simply going to lose this war. They were about to lose everything. It was no longer about one man's fixation or one family's turmoil. This had escalated into a full breakdown of a system based on falsehoods and partiality. And for the first time, they were held accountable for every decision they had ever made. The truth was out. The damage was permanent, and all they could do now was watch everything they cared about crumble away one by one. I didn't feel any shame about it. They had spent years tearing me down, convincing me that I was the problem. But, ultimately, reality had caught up with them, and there was no way out. The trials took nearly a year to conclude. It was like living in slow motion. Court appearances, meetings with attorneys, witness preparation, further hearings, and interminable waiting. But when it was finally finished, the results were better than I could have imagined. Everyone who attempted to destroy us paid for it. Jacob's criminal case was the first to end. The evidence was overwhelming. The messages, the letter, Sophie and her cousin's testimonies, the breach of the restraining order, and the porch camera footage. Nathan's participation completed the transaction. The prosecution created a chronology that demonstrated his behavior worsening over time and how he purposefully disobeyed limits and legal mandates. They also revealed court communications in which he talked to a buddy about getting Sophie to leave me, proving that this was not a mistake. There was a plan. The jury did not take long. After only 4 hours of deliberation, they found him guilty of all counts, including attempted sexual assault, harassment, stalking, and breaking a restraining order. In addition, Nathan was charged with federal crimes due to his role in money laundering. The judge sentenced him to 6 years in state jail and extra federal imprisonment to be served consecutively. He'll be in his 40s when he gets out. When he was condemned, he refused to look at me. He looked straight ahead, as if none of this was his responsibility. But I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I had no fear of him. I wasn't furious either. He was finally right where he belonged. My father's fate arrived a few months later. The inquiry into inheritance theft and financial fraud had become a distinct matter. The faked paperwork, financial transfers, and paper trail made no space for justifications. In court, his lawyers sought to explain that he was only trying to aid his kid, but the prosecution showed out how much money he had personally spent and tried to hide. He was found guilty of fraud, theft, and conspiracy to conduct financial crimes. The judge was not lenient with him. Michael received 3 years in prison, 4 years of supervised probation, and was compelled to repay almost all he had taken. He lost his job, his funds, and much of the respect he had possessed. Jennifer avoided incarceration, but she did not escape the repercussions. She was charged with harassment and obstruction for attempting to interfere with witnesses, as well as the internet defamation campaign. She accepted a plea agreement that included 2 years of probation, required treatment, and 300 hours of community service. Her sentencing included a 4-year prohibition on any direct or indirect contact with me or Sophie. Then followed the civil lawsuit. My lawyer presented a compelling case for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, harassment, and associated damages. A jury found clear and compelling evidence of malice in the smear campaign and online posts, awarding $1.5 million in compensatory damages for emotional distress and reputational loss, as well as punitive damages to discourage future misbehavior, attorney fees, and expenses as authorized by legislation. The court rendered judgment on the verdict. They were unable to pay the amount. So the family estate, including the house I grew up in, was confiscated and sold. We did not celebrate. There was no delight in it, just a long-awaited end. After fees and charges, the revenues from the sale completely fulfilled the judgment. After the court released the monies, we paid off our mortgage, saved for the future, and set aside money for our child. We cleared it to keep the transaction clean and save the equity for when we relocated a few months later. Sophie gave birth to our baby around 4 months after everything had finished. We named him Luke. Holding him for the first time seemed like the end of a long, sad story. I had spent my entire life trying to escape the catastrophe I was born into. And now he had a chance to start over and do things correctly. We decided we did not want our son to grow up in the shadows of that family. So we packed up and relocated to another city a few hours away. New house, neighborhood, and phone numbers. We closed off all conceivable lines of communication. We even changed our email addresses and erased the few distant relatives who continued to try to reach us. We would occasionally hear bits and pieces from common acquaintances. Jacob attempted to appeal his conviction. It was refused. Michael had health issues while in jail. Jennifer lived in a small apartment and was forced to quit her church because her conduct had become too irregular. I didn't feel sorry for any of them. The biggest surprise occurred when Jennifer mailed a handwritten letter to our former address. It was forwarded to us accidentally. It was lengthy, disorganized, and all over the place. Half apology and half blame. She apologized for how things ended out, but stated I had overreacted and wrecked the family. I did not even finish reading it. I torched it in our backyard fire pit. I look at Luke and realize how close we were to allowing all of that negativity to follow us forever. If we had remained silent. If we had simply disregarded what Jacob did, they may still be a part of our lives, but it would not be a worthwhile existence. It would be one in which we are constantly on guard, Sophie feels unsafe, and my son grows up believing that such conduct is usual. I don't regret what we did. Taking them to court, filing charges, and cutting them off. It was all worthwhile. Every hearing, every restless night, every unpleasant situation. It taught me something I wish I had known a long time ago. Blood does not imply loyalty. Family is not about DNA. It's all about respect, love, and safety. And if they can't offer you that, they're not your family. They're merely strangers with the same last name. Nowadays, life is tranquil. Sophie goes on walks with Luke every morning. We can bring people around for supper without worrying about trouble. Our house is peaceful, secure, and ours. No unsolicited calls, no unwelcome guests, and no one attempting to break us apart. And it was all I ever wanted. A genuine family. I choose one. I defend it, and I will never allow anyone to damage it.